Parents of Reddit, what is something your child has done that you can never forgive them for? My stepson came into my life when he was 12. He had a younger brother that was 6 at the time, also my stepson. Younger brother was relatively normal, but older stepson was having a lot of trouble in school, got in trouble all the time. Older stepson is in counseling because of his behavior. He's cutting himself in school, there's a suicide attempt. I'm devoting lots of time to trying to help him, trying to fix his life. He's incredibly intelligent and thoughtful. In the middle of this all, we find he has tens of thousands of pictures of child porn on his computer. Edit. Only looked at a small sampling, but it was the prepubescent kind. We delete them, consult a lawyer, bring it up in counseling, lock the computer down, install monitoring software. Stepson figures out how to get around everything, is clearly addicted to child pornography. He's 15, nearly 16. He brings home his 14-year-old girlfriend's underwear. I take them away. Edit. His therapy program specifically forbade this. See comments for details. He comes at me with a knife. Police are called, but he's smart and knows how to work them. We find a treatment program to deal with child pornography addiction. Go to counseling once a week and group counseling once a week. Part of this program is admitting your wrongs. You have to come out and admit it in front of the group. He drops a bombshell. He's been molesting his younger brother since he was 6 or 7, and he forcibly raped his now ex-girlfriend. The DA won't press charges because there's no proof, so we have to do this all voluntarily. We have to ask the state to please take him and give him services. If we don't, the state will take his younger brother and place him in protective care. It's a pretty traumatic process. He's removed from the home and placed in a day treatment program by social services, but only after several awkward months. In the meantime, his younger brother is having issues. He throws tantrums all the time, has to be restrained at home. We learn how to restrain our kid to prevent him from hurting himself. Treatment does not go well. He hates the program, hates the restrictions on his life. He's much smarter than the other kids in the program, so he becomes sort of a ringleader. He's labeled high risk and a potential psychopath. Eventually, he's about to turn 18 and the state is going to end their custody over him, since he's a voluntary case. He has to figure out what to do, or he'll be homeless, as he can't come back to living with us. He asks if we could just kick his younger brother out of the home and make him go live in state care so he can come live at home. I forgave him for most of it, but I'll never be able to forgive him for that moment where he was absolutely remorseless, where he asked if he could just take the place of his victim because the path he had chosen made his life harder. He knew very well what he was asking. He was never sorry for his actions. Edit. There has never been any evidence that the older brother was abused. Edit. Epilogue. This all ended several years ago. Older brother is now working and has stable housing, but we don't really keep in touch. Younger brother currently lives with me and is doing well. His mom and I are no longer together, and we were never married. Stepson is just the only word I know to describe my relationship with the two brothers. Edit. Thanks for all your replies and encouragement. I have to go to work, so I can't respond anymore today. I'm not a parent, but I did something that my mother will never forgive me for. Before I begin, you need to know some information about my mom. My mom is Catholic. She's been going to church every Sunday since she was 5. She believes that a man and a woman shouldn't have sex until after marriage. Me and my high school girlfriend were hanging out after school at my house as usual. Things started getting hot and heavy, and we started making out. Clothes were coming off, and at the time I finally thought I was going to lose my virginity. I had been with this girl for 3 years, and I had never gotten a blowjob or had sex with her. I had seen her naked and fondled her breasts, but that's as far as we had gone. Mid makeout, my girlfriend just stops and asks me if I wanted a blowjob. Obviously I said yes. I was finally getting my dick sucked, and it felt great. I was loving every moment of it until my mom walked in. Instead of knocking on my room door like she usually did before entering, she just opened the door. I don't know what a mother's reaction should be in this type of situation, but she started yelling at my girlfriend. When I say yelling, I mean I heard her say words that I never heard her say before. She called my girlfriend a hoe and said that God would damn us both to hell for our act of sin. My girlfriend at this point is in tears and she's scrambling to get on her clothes and pretty sure she left my house without her bra because she was in such a panic. My mom didn't speak to me for a month after that. She didn't ask me how my day was at school, she didn't speak to me during dinner, and she didn't even ask me to go to church on Sunday with her anymore. She used to go every Sunday, but I always said no. That's the angriest I have ever seen my mom, and we have never spoken about it. When she finally did talk to me, she said if I wanted her to ever speak with me again, that I had to go to confession and confess my sins. I told her I would go, but I ended up going to a Denny's and ordering their lumberjack grand slam instead. She thinks I went to confession though. Also, every time my girlfriend came over after the incident, my mom would leave the house. I don't know where she went, but she couldn't be in the same vicinity as her. Worst part of it all was my girlfriend didn't attempt to give me another blue job for a year because she was so scared of my mother walking in on us. TLDR, my mom walked in on my girlfriend giving me my first blue job, told me that I was going to hell for my sins, and we have never spoken about it since. Well, this will be an interesting one. For the record, I'm the son in question. I remember the day when I told my mother that my 17-year-old girlfriend was pregnant. Something changed in my mother, and it definitely was not for the better. I knew I had faked up, but didn't truly understand the struggle like my mother did. You see, my mother had me when she was 17 also. She had scholarships to go to art school and potentially make something of herself. She ended up taking care of me instead. I remember my mother looking at me and saying, "You are stupid if you choose to take care of that child." We got into a fight over it. I felt that, since I was the dumbass that got my girlfriend knocked up, I should be the one to take care of it. I had computer repair skills and a knack for working hard. Finding work wouldn't be that hard, would it? Fast forward a few years and I can understand just exactly what she meant. Please note, I do love my children every single day and wouldn't trade them for anything. I spent those years watching as all my friends grow further away from me. Most got distant and didn't want to talk to a guy who had 2 jobs and a kid. I was a buzzkill for most of them. I struggled and pushed through everything that I had to take care of her. I honestly wasn't sure if I was going to make it for a while. 2 jobs making minimum wage isn't enough to afford daycare and a 1-bedroom apartment here in Iowa. I feel I lost a portion of my sanity through those times. I spent most of it wondering what life would be like if I gave her up for adoption and had done what my mother suggested. Would I be happier? I would have graduated and have a job making significantly more money than I do now. I did eventually prosper, but my mother and I have never been the same. She lost custody of me when she was younger because she couldn't keep up. She was definitely proud of me when I received my degree and got a real job. It took 6 years to do what would have taken 2. I still did it though. My mother was never going to forgive me for putting myself through exactly what she went through. I proved her wrong nonetheless. Just because you are destined to fail doesn't mean you will. I have a second beautiful daughter and a wonderful girlfriend whom I plan on marrying next year. Some background. My son was a great kid as a child, but at about 11 or 12 he started to really change. In 5th grade the school told them to draw pictures of what they did over the summer. He drew a picture of what we did on the 4th of July and was promptly sent to alternative school because he made terroristic threats for drawing pictures of explosives. The problem was, the district had one alternative school that contained all the kids, from elementary school to high school. He got 3 weeks. We fought the punishment hard because it was BS. The problem is, by time we got some movement where they were lifting it, he had started getting in trouble at the alternative school. He was the middle kid and he would try way too hard to fit in. So now that the school had relented on the original punishment, he was in trouble and sentenced to more time in the alternative center because of his behavior there. He spent the rest of the semester there, got back to regular school after the new semester, and then wound up going back for other stuff. Anyway, a year or so later, his mom and I split up. He came with me along with his little brother, and our daughter stayed with her mom. He progressively got worse as he went through puberty, more and more trouble with school, extremely mean and defiant, etc. One thing to note us, that drugs were never really an issue. The couple of times he got in trouble for saying he did drugs, I took him for tests and they came up negative. This happened about 4 times. He would like to get in trouble. I'm not saying he never did them, but there was never any solid evidence he did. Move forward about 2 years, and he is 15, a month away from his 16th birthday. We had been camping, and when we got home, he immediately sat down to play Xbox. I told him we needed to get things sorted out, and that he could play afterwards, in about 30 minutes. He got super pissed, stomped to his room, and slammed the door and locked it. I brought in another load or two, and after about 5 minutes, I went to talk to him. His door was locked, so, after trying to get him to answer me through the door, I went and got a key. He did this a lot. I replaced the door knob with one that had a key, so I could get in when he did, and walked in to see my son had hung himself. I yelled for my girlfriend at the time to call 911 and started trying to pull him down. I had to hold his body against the wall with mine so I could untie him. I laid him down and started CPR. After a few cycles, I got a very thready pulse and he started agonal breathing, so I stopped and monitored the pulse, and it faded again, so I started CPR again. This happened for a few cycles before the ambulance arrived. They induced a coma, and he made it through this ordeal, but it was a huge loss. He is diagnosed with an anoxic B, which knocked a lot of his intelligence off. The recovery was slow, and he spent 6 weeks in rehab. For the first year he was very sweet again. He made it back to high school, and then it got 1000x worse than ever. He started getting very sexually inappropriate as well as having violent outbursts. One day he didn't come home from school. I panicked and, after calling the cops to report him lost, we found out he had been taken to jail. The cops nor school ever notified me they were doing it. Turns out, the school resource officer at the middle school, where my youngest son was going, called it in. He had hit his little brother at the bus stop and blackened his eye. Bam. He is in jail for domestic violence. The state had these charges, so there was nothing I could do. He was not allowed to be around his brother unsupervised, so by extension, he can't live with me anymore. He moves to his mom's house and is in jail again 6 weeks later for hitting both of them. So now you have a 16, almost 17-year-old kid with a B that the state will not allow to live with any of his siblings. My mother and father, who was on dialysis at the time, said that they could handle him, so they took him in. They had helped out a lot when he was in rehab and stuff, and he never got upset with them, so we agreed. Everything was fine for about 7 months, until Christmas came along. They took him to my brother's about the middle of the week. I was to meet them there on the weekend. I drive down and walk into all hell breaking loose. Apparently, he had exposed himself to a cousin and got confrontational when confronted with it. My mother tried to intervene, and he shoved her and she fell. That made the 3rd domestic violence charge on him, and this one against the elderly, along with an indecency charge. The way it worked in the county though is that they could not take him in until after an investigation took place. This made no sense to me, but whatever. Anyway, I had to load him up and drive him 4 hours back home and miss Christmas with my family. He wound up with a 3-year sentence over all of this and served 18 months of it. Right now he is out of jail and has his own place. It's a small RV, but it is his. I haven't seen him in maybe 3 months and have only talked to him once on the phone. I was 4 miles from him over Thanksgiving and came very close to going by and seeing him, but I didn't. So the part one can't forgive? For one, my father, who I was very close to, passed away the next summer. Because of my son, I missed the last Christmas with him. More than that, though, I will never ever forgive him for the thoughts I have had throughout all of this. A parent should never ever have to wonder if they did the right thing by saving his life. I hate that I have wondered how the last 6 years might have been had he died that day. Edit. I only mentioned the events that led up to my resentment of him. There was a lot more going on that are examples of his behavior. He was in intensive therapy for a long time before he attempted suicide. He was actually hospitalized several times and was in a residential system. The best we can determine is that he was having seizures in his frontal lobe. This caused him to have issues with impulse control. He was medicated for this and was actively taking it when he made the attempt. I have looked through some of the paperwork from when he was in jail and there are some signs that he may be suffering from schizophrenia. But because of his age, I can't get any info that he isn't willing to provide. This story is kinda the opposite of the question. My mother forgave me for something I never thought she would. This was a few years ago. I had lost my job and was going broke quickly. I needed money for rent and bills, and I really had nowhere to turn. One day I just panicked and committed an armed robbery to get a few bucks. I figured that if I wasn't caught immediately, I would get away with it. 5 days later the police are at my door. They take me to the station and charge me with robbery. I deny everything, but all I could think of was that the next few years would be in prison. I had only spent 5 days in jail previously for a DUI to this event. When they booked me finally they told me I could make one phone call. The only number one knew was my mother's. It's been the same since I was a kid. I turned the call down. I was too embarrassed. A few days later I had to go to medical for a physical. The nurse asks if anyone knows I'm in jail. I don't know why I told her, but I mentioned that I chickened out of calling my mom. She points to a phone in the office and tells her I can call her now. I just remember the phone ringing and hoping to God she wasn't home, but she was. I expected her to disown me, but she just seemed more concerned about my safety and if I needed anything. She said she would be proud of me, no matter what I did. The next day the jail tells me I have a visitor. I walk in and there is my mom. She starts crying and just smiles. She tells me that she's happy to see me and that she put $100 on my books so I can buy some supplies because she knows no one else would do it for me. My mother visited me once a month for 2 years. I received cards weekly, and even when I told her to stop sending money I would get a random $50. I guess the point is she never gave up on me. My mother and I talk all the time, more than before. I still get cards about once a month with a note inside reminding me how proud she is of me. Edit. Lots of love and questions. I was stupid and it's over. You can only kill a man once, so yeah I had my run in hell. I paid hard. I never got off easy. I can't give a good reason why I did it. I'm doing everything in my power to correct my errors, and if you can't accept then, avoid my path of what I did, and be true to thine self. Screw throwaways. Here's my story. I'm stepfather to my wife's 3 kids, a son and 2 daughters. The younger 2 are great kids, but the oldest daughter has always had a knack for choosing the wrong thing to do in situations. She of course does the normal teenager things of consistently choosing to hang around the wrong people, and despite her mother and I's attempts to get her to not repeat our own past mistakes, etc. She gets into drugs, ends up regularly doing crystal meth. We put her in inpatient rehab which she falls out of and relapses. We put her in outpatient rehab which she falls out of and relapses. Insurance has covered all they will so we try having her join Narcotics Anonymous for a while and she again relapses. When she realizes we are going to find out, she crosses the final line. She robbed us blind while we were both at work and took off with the guy she was hooking up with. I could have even gotten over the material things, stuff is stuff. But she went further than just cleaning out the house. She stole my wife's identity and cleaned out our bank account. We were very much living check to check at the time and bills were not all perfectly on time. This was catastrophic to our finances. Insurance fought the claim as it was a family member who lived in the residence and had permission to use things she took. We also were not great at documenting possessions, so they were really fighting the things we claimed. In the end we dropped the entire claim out of frustration and replaced essential things slowly out of our own pocket, but we only ever replaced about 25% of the items. Bills got dangerously behind, having to beg and borrow from family to keep the lights on. Wife took a very hard emotional hit from her daughter doing this and blamed herself despite my assurances that she raised her well and she chose to go down this path on her own. Wife ended up sinking into a depression and lost her job due to calling in too much. I've managed by a small miracle to keep things afloat with the help of family and serious overtime. Wife managed to get another job, paying less but still something. We'd gotten to an untenable position even with her new job and were losing the house. We managed to find another place that was smaller, but a few hundred less in rent as well as less in utilities as it was newer construction. Daughter was arrested and sent to a local jail pending identity theft charges. Stress was high as wife and daughter tried to work things out. Wife develops medical issues and she has to cease working. Turns out the last 2 years of stress really took a toll, and it appears after some significant testing that she has manuscript and it's getting worse quickly unless she takes steps to reduce her stress. Eventually we dropped the identity theft charges with the stipulation on my end that she never ever live with us again for any reason. Daughter moves to another city a couple of hours away, keeps in sparse contact, visits maybe once or twice on her way in and out of town for concerts. She seems to have finally cleaned up, but is too broke to help us at all. Wife in the meantime can't get disability, yet due to her social being royally screwed up due to the identity theft. I get a second job and work 70 to 80 hour weeks to pay the bills. We downsize a lot. We lose both of our cars and I buy a $1,000, 20-year-old clunker. We sell whatever we can, not really much left. That doesn't have too much sentimental value. I cash out my $401k. It's now 4 years later. I'm still working 70 to 80 hours a week. Our bills are finally stable, but I'm still paying off almost 80k in debt. I've still not gotten the new car and have spent around $1,000 a year keeping this old one running. It will be nearly 2020 before I have clawed my way out of this hole. No, I can never forgive her for this. Edit. Holy crap. My inbox is absolutely exploding right now. I'm extremely humbled by the outpouring of support. I really just tossed this out on my lunch break as a kind of cathartic release. I never thought I'd get such an overwhelming response. Edit 2. A lot of people have had follow-up inquiries and I haven't been able to keep up with them all, so let me add a bit more of this story. The kids at the time were in their late 20s, so they are all living on their own now. However, 2 years ago the daughter I focus on in the story did get pregnant. Wife and I both agreed she would not be a fit mother, and quite frankly the kid was at high risk of not making it to term with her drug use. So after some discussion and consultation with our supportive family, we agreed to adopt the baby, since my wife had a full hysterectomy before we had met and really regretted not having a child with me. The adoption was finally finalized this September and she just turned 2 this last Saturday. I'm sure that some of you are probably considering me clinically insane for taking this last step even after everything else, but I assure you this part has in fact worked out for the best. My wife having to care for a child again is pulling her out of the depression this put her in, and I absolutely and unequivocally love this child and live every day to make her life better. For her alone, and the extra time I might spend with her with your help, I've agreed to the public demand, such PMs, for the following. Crowdfunding link as demanded. I have to stress that I can pay my essential bills. Others out there may be in more need of assistance, but any dollars received will directly reduce my hours worked at night and give me more time with her, for which I will be ever grateful. Obligatory kid picture. http imgur.com/xkigby. Don't have kids yet, but I can share something that I did that my parents have never forgiven me for. I won't even use a throwaway. I got my parents in trouble with the police and child services when I was 7. About 20 years ago give or take. I was in the 4th grade, living in a medium-sized town in New Jersey. I'm a first-generation Chinese American. Both my parents are from Hong Kong and moved to the States in their teens. I was a super hyper kid. Both my parents worked in New York City and came home late. They didn't have the time to take me to Pee Wee soccer or Pop Warner football. So, I was always the disruptive kid in class, as school was my only real outlet for socialization. To all the kids who grew up with their parents throwing around a football or a baseball, Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas presents, yeah, I wished I had parents like yours. Anyway, my parents are both very traditional immigrant Chinese people. So when I was bad, my parents used to discipline me. I didn't know any different at the time. My father used to use this bamboo stick or the handle of a feather duster to do it. I just thought that everyone went through the same thing. Well, one day at school, a teacher got wind of it. I don't remember how exactly. Maybe they saw a bruise. Maybe I mentioned something. Maybe I wanted the attention. It's all a fuzzy blur, but very quickly, word went from my teacher to nurse, from nurse to principal, From principal onward, you get the point. It got ugly fast. Phone calls were made, and that night detectives were at my house. My parents knew something was up cause they started getting phone calls. When my mom got home from work, I remember she said hey Wap instead of my normal name of Wapoon. She'd never called me that in my life. I knew I faked up. It was bad. Very bad. I tried explaining that my dad never hit me cause he was angry or in rage. But it was just the way he did things. I guess that lessened what punishments would have come their way. Eventually, things started to clear out. We were lucky I guess. We had to go through family counseling. My parents never forgave me for that. From that till now, I've been treated as a second-class citizen till the time I left the house and went to college. I would get the one-ply toilet paper, while everyone else got the two-ply so to speak. I had a kid sister whom they babied and gave the world to and celebrated. Growing up, I felt more like a financial liability to my parents, rather than their flesh and blood. I became an angry teenager who listened to a lot of Rage Against the Machine and Papa Roach at the time. I cringe at Papa Roach as I type this. I can empathize with both sides though. To my parents, I was their pride and joy, who inexplicably and suddenly became for them this source of terrible shame and remorse. I guess for a proud traditional Chinese man, I hurt him very much, in a world where Chinese men are taught to be bulletproof emotionally. On the other hand I think, dude, this is America. This isn't the same place as where you came from. For many years, I have trying to repair my relationship with my parents. Maybe they faked up. Maybe I faked up a little too. It taught me that the world isn't perfect and maybe that's okay. I have some serious fears though about me being a shitty dad as a result of all of these things. I hope not. For what it's worth though, I think I'm stronger for it. I don't harbor any ill feelings anymore, despite how awful it must have been for all of us through those years. I hope that one day they will forgive me, because I know I have forgiven them. Edit since a lot of people are PM me asking me this, here are some clarifications. A general thank you to everyone who responded. I think you've all got some really valid, logical thoughts about raising children. Many of these values are the same values I hope to raise my own kids with one day. I think now that so much time has passed, I'm able to understand some of the circumstances that led to these events. I think the guilt that I carried for many of these years is because, to me, I tore the family apart. That kind of shame, albeit externally placed, is a heavy burden in Chinese culture. I remember pre-7-year-old me to be jolly and merry with my pops. We were playful. I was the manifestation of hope for a better life. My parents really didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They didn't invest in integrating with the community. They were just trying to make ends meet I guess. I mean, my dad worked hard 7 days a week. So I guess he was trying to raise me the best way he could. I think what made it so hard for us as a family was that I really hurt him, deep. To him, I had exposed his squishy vulnerable heart and burned him in the worst way, in his eyes. I guess he shut down. I guess he made it so I could never hurt him that way ever again. I was angry with the world. I felt that I was dealt a shit hand. I was torn between two very opposing cultures. I felt 100% American and yet at the same time 100% Chinese. I eventually got over it, embraced who I am. College definitely helped. I later majored in sociology and wrote my senior thesis around different kinds of Asians in the tri-state area. First generation Asians, half Asians, adopted Asians. It was therapeutic. In many cases, they looked how I felt, half Asians. In others, I felt their pain. Figuring them out helped me figure myself out. Edit thank you to whoever gave me Reddit gold. I have had a great time sharing with everyone, and I'm very humbled by this experience. TLDR 4th grade teachers found bruises on me from parents disciplining me. Escalated to law enforcement and child protection services being involved. Chinese parents never forgave me for it. Throwaway, of course. My daughter came into my life when she was 18 months old. I started dating her father who had just one full custody of her and was struggling to raise a girl on his own. Man, you should have seen the way she was dressed. I come from a background of step-parent adoption. My biological father was never in my life and I feel as if I was truly blessed to have this man who owed my mother and I nothing. come in and be the best husband/dad around. So, once it became time and we agreed to marry, I felt that the right thing to do was to adopt her and give her everything that I had been given. Fast forward 3 years, and long story short, the marriage is over. Over the upcoming months I start finding drawings of myself tied to a tree. Myself being beaten like a pinata. I know cause they say mom. I try to get her into counseling, and her father refuses. I did my best to make sure she knew it wasn't her fault. I wasn't leaving her, etc. Yet there was so much anger aimed at me. Fast forward again 5 more years. She is now 9ish and continually more aggressive, and is now mastering the arts of emotional manipulation. Even when the truth is easier, she lies. Stealing, failing at school, bullying, and yet at the same time claiming she is a victim. She knows she is adopted, we never hid it, and twice has told me that I'm a horrible person and should never have picked her. Each woman her father dates is better than me, and she lays constant shame. Each woman brings another tantrum demanding that I give her up and let a better person raise her. I'm working my single ass off to provide for her the half of the year she is with me, but I do not see any appreciation. Just hate. At age 11 we find out that she is smoking, doing drugs and had more sexual partners that I had through my 20s. She is stealing my diamonds and thong underwear. I have to install a lock on my bedroom to keep my things safe from her, and still her father will not allow counseling. Her answer for why she does it all I don't know, cause I can. Nothing is stolen at her dad's house and now we are stuck in this cycle. Dad's house is good. Dad doesn't need to discipline. Mom's house is bad, and she's always choosing the route that will get her in trouble. At age 12 she ran away from her dad's home in the middle of the night. I really had no clue kids in the 2000s would actually tie bed sheets together and shimmy out windows, but alas, the sheet billowing in the wind was proof. This was somehow my fault, not sure how, and the first time I heard all of the malicious rumors she has been spreading about me. When speaking with the local law enforcement, a neighbor came out screaming and crying that I be taken into custody for physical and mental abuse of my daughter. For 3 years my kid had been playing on this woman's sympathies, telling her that I force her to have sex with my boyfriends, burn her with cigarettes, beat her and threaten to kill her father if she tries to speak up. Then I find out the whole neighborhood believe this is true. They believed that I was beating the crap out of my kid and my ex-husband for years. We also discover at this same time that she has over 20 social media accounts, each one representing another side of her personality. One she was a gang member, toting guns to school and beating others. One she was a rap victim, reaching out to persons on chat to build her back up. Another she was a blasphemous angry teen who beat the hell out of her mother. The only common theme across her stories was the horrible mother she had to endure. A week later she was admitted to the psychiatric children's ward due to an incident at school. There they blanket diagnosed her with depression, suicidal ideation and oppositional defiant disorder. This was also the first and only time that she blamed her father for everything and begged to live with me with no visits to her father, and, because I knew she needed the help, I agreed for the short term, take FMLA and work to get her better. For 3 months we lived with no separation. She was never left home alone. She was worked back into society with established visits, counseling, socialization. I did it all. I lived life on edge waiting for her to steal, run, scream, anything. Police to come to my door and tell me I was arrested for kidnapping her. Something. It's been ongoing for so many years I expected it. Eventually we worked her father back into her life and returned to our week on week off visits. Things seemed better. Age 13, now we are cutting because life is so horrible. At least that is the costume she wears around some drives, and all of us are starting to realize that this isn't depression, this is something more. ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, cluster B psychopaths. Can't find a name for it, can't find a medical cocktail that works. And her stories keep changing. The name carved on her arm. This boy rapped her cause mom let him do it. The heart carved on her thigh. For the love my mother doesn't give me. It's been a total of 7 rages against me now. Heartless, cruel rages holding me responsible for every bad choice she's ever made. Demanding that I leave her and I'm cracking. I'm starting to show physical signs of the stress and damage all of this has done to me over the years. I can't be around my friends' kids cause I no longer enjoy children. Today, she is 15. In mid-November I received a 9-page letter from her demanding that I change, or she is going to return to the old her. That she hates me, and the worst thing I have ever done in my life was adopt her, and that I either need to hug or die. In the folded up pages was a 1-inch thick roll of folded toilet paper covered in her blood. In her letter she told me that I'm the only reason she cuts, and that she will continue to cut until she gets what she wants. 5 days later I packed up her things and sent her to her dad's. I can't do it anymore, and I feel like shit for giving up. But I now resent her for taking away all those years and destroying my interest in children. I have no interest in ever having one of my own now, and I cannot look at my niece and nephew with affection because I'm so jaded. I do not know if I will attempt contact with her anymore. I don't know if my heart or my head can take it anymore. I believe the anger is misplaced, as it is all mother related, so could be abandonment issues stemming back to her biological mother, but I don't know if she realizes or will ever realize what she has done. All I know is don't ask me to babysit. TLDR, lazy faker does drugs, abuses elderly mother, steals her money, gets killed by his hookah girlfriend. Friend of a friend. I met the guy in passing a few times, and he was a major asshole and a horrible person. Lazy as all fuck. This guy hated working. All he wanted to do was watch sports, drink, and eat. He worked only when he absolutely had to. Lied to everyone about what he did. Yeah, I work for Dell/IBM/Big Bank/Huger Corp and their fuck it department. And was one of those know-it-all bastards who jump into any conversation and make it about them. He would start some job, work for a bit, then quit because it was not challenging enough, or they don't pay me enough for my knowledge. Sound like he was a smartest 20-something? He was a 50-year-old man-child. He starting doing drugs, then lost job after job, because he quickly got to the point where he couldn't stay clean for more than a week. I know he was fired from one job for showing up still drunk from the night before, and another because he was found passed out in the bathroom after shooting up something. Started to sell drugs to try and make money, got involved with a LTR with a prostitute, stole money from his mother. Father died when he was a kid. She was in her 80s, disabled, and not all mentally there. Drove to Oklahoma or Louisiana to gamble at the casinos. Lived in her house. Tried to get her to change her will so he would get everything, and made her sign a fake, handwritten version. Abused her. Tried to sell the house in some shady mortgage deal and get power of attorney over her. She wasn't really in a mental or physical state to do much other than sit in her chair and cry all day. It didn't help that the hookah girlfriend would sometimes bring Johns to the house when he was there, and when he wasn't, the rest of the family tried to do everything they could to get rid of him, and his sister was finally able to get power of attorney over her only a week or two before she died. Even though they got her into a nursing home, she declined quickly. Afterwards he wasn't supposed to get the house, but he refused to leave. He basically started to hoard crap inside and barricaded himself in while the family was trying to get him to leave. The police wouldn't get involved. Don't know why. Less than 6 months after his mother died, he was killed or died of a heart attack or something. Remember the prostitute girlfriend? Yeah, she and her 21-year-old son showed up one day and beat him to death. I don't remember if anyone knew what was said, but it was loud, with yelling and screaming, to the point neighbors called the police. The son and his mother got in their car and drove off before the cops got there. They walked in, found his body, and since they knew who he was, called his sister and aunts to let them know. No charges, no investigation worth a damn, just another druggie dead, as far as they were concerned. After the rest of the family came in to clean up and sell the house, they found drugs stashed in closets and under trash, and anything of value of the mother's gone. Family heirlooms like jewelry and furniture weren't where it had been for 50 plus years. No one knew if he had sold it all before, or if the hookah girlfriend stole it when they killed him. Just a pathetic story overall, nothing but a wasted life, maybe an object lesson as to how not to live. I'm not a parent, but my stepfather has completely given up on his daughter, my stepsister. My stepsister and I are about the same age. When he first started seeing my mom we were about 12, and he moved in with us when we were 13. She lived with her mother, but would visit us fairly often. He talked about how wonderful she was his little girl. When I first met her I immediately realized she was a pathological liar. She'd lie about absolutely everything, but he ate it up. This drove me crazy when I was a kid, but for years he'd think she could do no wrong. Eventually though he became wise to her lying. She told her mom she was going to see her dad on his birthday, but then called us and said she couldn't come. She ended up taking the money her mother gave her for a gift and went partying with it on her dad's birthday. It went on like this for years. She would make plans then abandon them at the last minute to go partying. She would only call to hit him up for money under the guise of "let's hang out, I miss you," before asking for $100 so she could get drunk that weekend. When she was 20 and dating this 35-year-old guy she got pregnant. They were going to raise the baby together. She drank, smoked, and was on a lot of prescription drugs during the pregnancy, never giving up her partying. Needless to say, the baby was born with some pretty significant issues. She wouldn't eat and nearly starved to death. She didn't walk until she was 3, and even now at 6 she can only say a few words. She's incredibly small for her age, at 6 looking no more than 3 years old. I'm glossing over many years, but it was clear fairly quickly that this child had issues and was going to require special care. My stepsister had no interest in that. She left her boyfriend, the child's father, calling my parents saying that he hit her and that he hit the baby when there's no evidence of that being true. And I'm not just victim blaming. She laughingly told one of her friends that she made it up so she'd be able to get more money from him. She started couch surfing with the baby in tow, still going to parties and leaving the baby at random people's houses. My parents sometimes took the baby just so they knew the baby was safe. But eventually stopped to try to convince her that she should have some responsibility. My stepsister was basically homeless at this point, since her friends were getting tired of having a baby around when trying to party. I had moved out, so they offered to let my stepsister move into my old room with the baby under the condition that she respect the rules of the house. Took the baby to the clinic where she was supposed to be getting help several times a week, and only went to parties on weekends. She refused. My parents and the father of the child started lobbying to take the child out of her custody. He's a wonderful person who only wants to take care of his child, but since my stepsister was just couch surfing it was difficult to find her and the kid. Eventually, after some of her friends spoke up about her partying and her lying about his abuse at the custody hearing, she lost custody of the kid. The child lives with her father now, and my parents go visit her a couple of times a month. My stepsister doesn't even get her a present on Christmas or her birthday. My stepsister still calls on occasion to ask for money, pretending to miss her family, the same shtick she used when she was 14, but my stepfather has basically cut off all contact with her. He doesn't really talk about her now, but it's been a long road since Dad's perfect little girl. Edit. And as a wonderful update to this story, I was just talking to my mom, and my stepsister is pregnant again and having yet another abortion next week. This will be the second abortion, since I'm not including the fake pregnancy and fake abortion that we all know didn't happen. She didn't call herself, since my parents won't answer her calls, but had a friend call to tell them, because that's really something friends want to do. My mom is going to go to the appointment with her to try to convince her to get her tubes tied, since she can't just continue to use abortion as a form of birth control. She really is just a despicable human being. My sister escaped a controlling abusive marriage when I was 12. She had nothing but a 6-month-old son when she moved back into my parents' home. I spent the next 15 years very active in raising that child, was basically another parent. When he was a teenager, he helped his father blindside my sister with a lawsuit suing for custody. Her ex tried this every other year or so, just to haul her into court and force her to have to deal with him, but they never went anywhere before this. He was old enough that his wishes would be considered, and she didn't have the dollar sign to fight. Keep in mind that my nephew had never made any mention of wanting to live with his dad. So, that little sheet sat in court and spewed out the most hurtful lies about my sister. She was a single mom and had her share of problems, but she worked her ass off, and the whole family chipped in to make sure his life was the best we could all provide. After hearing that kid tell a judge about my sister parading men through the house and leaving him alone for days while she was out whoring, I saw my sister completely give up on her son. Now he's in his 20s and lives in his dad's basement. I understand that he is another victim of his father's psycho control, but when he said those things about my sister and I saw her heart break like that, I was done too. I'm not a parent, but I know my mom will never forgive my sister. When my grandmother died, she left each one of us have a wedding set. My sister, being the oldest, chose my grandmother's, and I got my great grandmother's, which was a 2.5 quart diamond. Hers was 1 quart. Anyways, my sister brought some friends over and raided my parents' house, stole my dad's chainsaw and TV, stole all of my mom's jewelry including a pendant that was from the women's rights movement, and stole $800 in cash that was for my mom's work. She collects insurance payments, so she has cash. It was hidden in my room, so they went through everything. She pawned her wedding set and stole mine along with a ring that was my grandfather's and my tennis bracelet my father gave to my mother on their wedding day. Mom gave it to me when I got engaged. The pendant meant the world to my mom, as my grandmother used to tell stories of her mother to my mother when she was younger. My mom and grandmother were very close, and a lot of my mom's jewelry was my grandmother's. My sister laughed about it. She didn't care and still doesn't. She's also called the police on my dad for hitting her and threatening her with a gun, and also for slapping around her son. None of that being true. She's a bitch. I'm pretty sure my mother has not forgiven my 41-year-old brother for something that happened when he was 4. Allowed 13 seconds to himself in the bathroom, he managed to park her off the toilet to snag a bottle of Flintstones vitamins from a very high shelf and quickly gobble the entire contents. The Flintstones vitamins had already become a bone of serious contention between my mom and brother. Other parents will be familiar with the Raymond-like fixation kids can have to stuff they like, as well as their complete inability to grasp the concept of moderation. As a parent, they push you to points where you regret ever introducing them to any external stimuli in the world, because you find yourself stuck in these Groundhog Day loops that eat your soul, but seemingly have no impact on their savant chimp minds. So, my brother's dream of unfettered Flintstones consumption comes true, and my mom, worried for him, but also kind of seething at his idiotic victory in the Flintstones battle of there can be only one eaten per day, takes him to the emergency room. My brother ended up being fine. Skip to a few days later, Child Protective Services shows up for a surprise home visit, I suppose to determine if there was some kind of Munchausen by Flintstones thing going on with my mom. The confusion and anxiety response in my mom quickly transitioned to self-righteous humiliation. My mom being martyred is as scary as when other people turn into screaming lunatics. She's someone who genuinely, if sometimes unnecessarily, self-sacrifices quite a bit for her family, especially her children. Pretty sure she will CPS out of the house through the sheer power of her mom guilt mind bullets. I still sometimes egg her on to tell the story just cause of how worked up she gets at my brother. Lord, how he pestered me about those Flintstone vitamins every day with those daggum Flintstone vitamins, and to a lesser extent the CPS folks with the haughty tone and questioning eyebrows. This one's about my sister, not my kid, but it's something that I'm not sure my mother's ever forgiven her for. My sister was never the perfect daughter. She generally did poorly in school, got into fights, joined a gang, a pretty tame one, though, and did some soft drugs, mostly weed and X. She snuck boyfriends over to the house and had sex with them in my room, as well as my brother's room. She's stolen money from my younger brother, 9 years difference between my sister and brother, and run away from home. Despite all that, I still love her. But the one thing I can never forgive her for is when she abandoned her daughter. She and her husband had just split up and were in the middle of a divorce. She was cheating on him with a kid from another state. Seriously, the guy was a kid, something like a 12-year difference between him and her. Her husband found out and hit her. Pretty nasty stuff all around. My sister moved into my parents' place with her daughter. A couple weeks later, my sister and my mom get into a major fight, and my sister storms out and drives to her boyfriend's place. While she's packing her bags, my niece is grabbing at her, screaming, "Don't leave me, mommy," crying and apologizing, begging her not to go, begging her not to leave her alone. My niece keeps crying, "I love you, mommy. I want to stay with you." My sister shakes her off and just leaves. Eventually, she came back in order to get partial custody, but those cries will haunt me forever. Even if both my parents and her daughter have forgiven her, I never will. Geez, this thread is depressing. Since everyone else is sharing, I guess I'll share too. I'm not a parent, but I'm one of the psychotic kids everyone's talking about. Let's see where to start. I was pretty normal and happy until December 15th, 1990, when my dad committed suicide. Looking back on it, I was pretty thoroughly attached to him, more so than I was to my mom. I just could not understand why he'd leave me. In fact, my mom tells me that Christmas, I burst into tears at dinner and said, "Why would daddy leave us? Doesn't he know his boys need him?" Awful, right? My poor mom. Because of my dad's suicide, I developed profound emotional issues. I tortured cats and other small animals. I tortured my little brother. I do mean tortured. I've locked him in a box. He developed claustrophobia from that one. I've shot him. I've stabbed him. I lit him on fire once because he fell asleep and his arm was in my way. I also convinced him that our dad committed suicide because he was a bad kid. Really awful stuff. I used to steal everything. I lied about everything. I was an outcast at school because I was new. I was kicked out of my Catholic school despite my grandpa being the president of the board, and the other kids would pick on me, so I destroyed them. I was arrested for the first time in 2nd grade for beating another kid senseless and then running away from school after he picked on me. I was also committed by one of my several psychologists when I was in 2nd grade. That sort of thing would usually be traumatic, but all I really remember was how awesome it was to get to play video games in school there. I was finally put on a medication that mellowed me out. Unfortunately, it put me to sleep, and kids and teachers would make fun of me while I was sleeping. Shitty thing to do, but I had put them through hell, so. Anyways, my high school years were the happiest of my childhood. For my mom, I was good. I got good grades. I was responsible, etc. Then, I went off to college and discovered alcohol and drugs. Starting with weed and ending with crack cocaine several years later, I became a full-fledged addict. I even got my brother hooked with me. He never finished high school, and we both started stealing and lying to fund/hide our habits. Luckily, we were pretty good at stealth mode and were able to keep our mom from finding out until after we'd cleaned up. Though we were total assholes to her, she just thought that was our personalities and had no inkling that it was because we were constantly high or jonesing. Anyways, I'm happy to say that my brother quit cold turkey 6 years ago, April, and I did the same the following July. Now, I quit a week before my birthday because I wanted to start my next year on a fresh page. Fortunately/unfortunately, being the master manipulator I was for so many years, I went into court on my birthday to make payment arrangements on the thousands of dollars I owed to the city of Phoenix. I knew I was in trouble, but figured I'd get another chance, especially because it was my birthday. From various charges and traffic tickets, the judge saw through my bullshit, and I landed in jail instead. Though it sucked at the time, I've since written a letter to that judge thanking her. I had been clean for a week when she put me in, and being in jail, I was forced to stay clean. She probably saved my life. I got out, got a job, got into a diversion program, and successfully completed it, so my drug record was expunged. I've had several setbacks, all financial, though no relapses, but I've now moved to Dallas. I have a great job. I'm a year from getting my bachelor's in accounting. My brother and I have an amazing, very close relationship. His first baby is due next Sunday. We're all very excited. Somewhere around middle school, I developed a sense of empathy and stopped taking pleasure in causing harm to small animals and other people. I've apologized for the horrible behavior and all the shit I put my family through. I even helped my mom color her hair, since I'm the one who put it there. This Thanksgiving, We all managed to make it back to Phoenix for dinner with my grandparents, and everyone expressed how proud they were of me for finally pulling myself together. That was what I'm most thankful for, that I'm finally someone my family can be proud of, as opposed to ashamed of. Anyways, I hope reading the abridged version of my life will give some of you parents a glimmer of hope. It is actually possible that your kids will turn out okay. Also, I'd like to say that, even when I was screaming at my mom how much I hated her, I actually cherished her. I was just afraid she'd leave too, and I had to push her away until I could get a grip. Don't give up on your babies. My mother always forgave my sister. My mom passed away in June, and after some more shenanigans my sister is finally cut out of the family for good. Some of the things she did: told administrators at her school that my parents forced her to smoke pot. On another occasion, told her school administrators that my parents locked her in the closet and wouldn't feed her. Ran away from home at 17 and told the person she was living with that my mom and dad abused her in some awful ways. When my mom went to go talk to her, after finding out where she was, the person she lived with took a knife to my mom's throat and threatened her life trying to protect my sister. Came back, ran away from home again, to live next door with a creepy older guy and her girlfriend, and do drugs openly, to piss off my family. Stole $2,500 from my grandma and $3,000 from my great aunt. My mom got sick, cancer, and my sister and her new girlfriend came to live with my parents. My parents couldn't make bills and my mom needed someone to take care of her during the day, so it worked out with my sister and girlfriend paying 1/3 of bills and my parents paying 2/3. My mother passed away and then my sister stole my mom's wedding ring that was left to me to have when I married. Took a bat and destroyed all of my dad's things. Didn't pay their part of the bills. Took my dad's money that he paid them to take care of the bills. Stole $500 out of my dad's bank account. Created an AT&T account in my mom's name post-mortem and never paid for it. Left my dad in the lurch and moved away. And the real kicker that finally broke the camel's back was, had my dad arrested for indecency with a child. Got my 11-year-old nephew to exaggerate saying that my dad exposed himself to him, when in reality my nephew is weird and likes to try to burst in on people and see them naked so he can say I saw you naked, ha ha ha. The charges were dropped last month. I only hate one person. Well, two. My sister and her girlfriend. And I will never ever forgive them. I've got one of those reverse replies. I can't believe my mother forgave me. In a huge fight, I told my mom she was a bad mother. And I've never seen my mom look so hurt in my life. To give some context, my mom has done a hell of a job. Her first husband, she had 2 kids with my 2 older half sisters. He was a drunk and walked out on her, despite my oldest sister being born with cerebral palsy, prone to seizures, and being in a wheelchair her entire life. My other sister is incredibly smart and motivated, polar opposite from the other one. She marries again, to my father. He joins the Navy to get his act together, and despite being top of his class, the night before he gets deployed he goes on a cocaine bender and gets kicked out of the Navy. He ends up walking out on my mom when I was 3, and I haven't seen or spoke to him since I was 5. One day when I was in middle school, we got into a huge fight. I can't even remember what it was about, but in the heat of the moment I threatened to call DCFS and tell them she was a bad mother. And just like that, all the fight left her. She was broken and just had this heartbreaking look on her face. I've never been more sorry in my life. To this day I don't know how she ever forgave me, but I've done my best to never take her for granted since. As a single mother of 3, including one that's paralyzed, she worked her ass off. She worked 2 jobs and went to community college, eventually getting her degree and a good job as a graphics designer at Motorola. My paralyzed sister took 8 years, but got her bachelor's. My other sister completed her master's in nursing and is currently en route to her doctorate. I recently graduated with a CS degree and work in it. She worked harder than anyone I'll ever know, and my whole family owes everything we have to her. I love my mom. Not the parent in this situation, but I know that my mother hasn't forgiven me for ruining her life, or so she says. My father used to beat my younger brother. My mother looked the other way and tried to make up for the lack of love by doting on him. What she didn't know was that my father was also molesting me for several years. It started sometime in early elementary school. He'd tell me to never tell my mother because I would break her heart and break up our family. I hated it. I felt ashamed and disgusted, but I thought that sort of thing was normal. I was scared of all of my friends' fathers because I assumed they did the same thing. As I got older, I started watching those silly Stranger Danger says in school and realized that what was happening to me was not normal at all. It finally hit me what was happening to me, and I got angry. When I hit 13, I finally stood up to him and was surprised when he let me go. Scared that he'd come back and do something worse later. Remembering how he beat my brother, I went to my mother for help. She cried, but I guess with how terrible my father was, she still tells me to this day what a sexual deviant he was, hiring prostitutes regularly, pressuring my mother to wife swap, etc. It wasn't so hard for her to believe. She kicked him out, and he lived with his best friend for 7 months. He apologized, but I was so bitter I shut him out. I still remember one of the last times I saw him. He was visiting at the house, and I was playing a PS1 game with my brothers. He kissed me on the forehead and said goodbye. I brushed him off and continued playing my game, but I could see out of the corner of my eye how hurt he looked. My mom started looking toward divorce and got a new boyfriend. Apparently somewhere along the way she angrily told my dad to kill himself for ruining the family. He followed through and killed himself when I was 14. It sent shockwaves through the family. We never told family and friends what happened, so they blamed my mother for leaving him for no reason. My dad had a good reputation, upstanding military guy, well loved by everyone. I was diagnosed with PTSD. My mother denied all our problems. I was the only one who never denied what happened, and she would be so ashamed of me for wanting to go to therapy, for taking antidepressants. I only went to 3 therapy appointments and took medication for a few months before she stopped taking me. What was sad was that my mom's new boyfriend turned out to be an alcoholic. We were chased out of our own home several times and had to call the police. At one point he threatened my mom, and I locked her in my closet while she was on the phone with the cops. I screamed at him and asked how he could do this to our family, fully knowing what had happened to us. She kept letting him back in, even after he punched my brother and broke his nose. The same one that my father used to beat. He was 15. My mother ran to my brother, and I stood between him and my mother and brother. He was still trying to get at my brother. I screamed at him that he was a 45-year-old man, retired Marine, trying to fight with a 15-year-old, that he was a bully. We were on the driveway so neighbors heard us, came to our aid, called the police. After he was out of the hospital she came to me and made excuses. He didn't break his nose. Your brother's nose was already broken because of your dad. That's why it bled so much. I was so disgusted with her for failing to protect us, for letting another monster into our lives. I told her to stop making excuses for him and that he broke my brother's nose. Because cops were involved we got a restraining order. Got to deal with child services searching our house for the first few weeks to make sure my mom wasn't letting him back in. I got drilled asking if we were hiding him, if my mom was lying, if I was lying. After they were clear he apparently stalked us, even when we went on vacation to another city. My mom let him back in the house. She made the excuse that he was just staying over until he could get an apartment, but after a few weeks it was obvious he was here to stay. I was an angry 17-year-old at that time and I exploded. I told her exactly how I felt about him. He was in the other room and was punching the wall listening to me, but I didn't care. How she was failing to protect her son and let someone who wanted to harm him right back in the house. I reminded her that we still had a restraining order on him and it was in place for a reason. Reminded her how he had chased us out of our own home, destroyed thousands of dollars worth of property. He would go on drunken rampages. She got so mad she tried to strangle me. My brother dragged her off me. I heavily considered getting emancipated, but I didn't want to leave my brothers behind. 10 years later now my mom still screams at me for ruining her life. My dad was her hero. He saved her from her abusive mother and the love of her life. I moved out at 19, but recently had to move back, in needing help with my daughter. Over the years, since I moved out I tried so hard to mend our relationship, tried to be a good kid. Never did any drugs, graduated from high school, both my brothers dropped, stayed out of trouble. Help her every chance I get, even took one of my brothers in for a while, when she couldn't afford to keep him, while I was pregnant, and working to support myself, and my bum ex. Maybe I'm trying to make up for what happened. Even despite that she makes it very clear, that she hates my guts, very recently telling me how she wishes I was never born. The brother that was beaten had wild teenage years, he got into drugs, got arrested, got banned from stores for stealing, etc. He's cleaned up now, and my mother is so proud of him. The youngest never got anywhere in life, my mother sent him overseas to go to school, and still supports and pays for him. Me. I'm 26 now, with a kid, and going to college, paying for myself, taking loans and applying for grants, kicking ass with grades, super close to my degree. She took out a credit card under my name when I was 19 and didn't tell me, gambled my future. She paid it off before defaulting on everything and having to foreclose. Her credit is totally destroyed and mine was close. It terrifies the shit out of me. Refuses to help me with anything and has borrowed several thousand from me. It's clear that I'm the least favorite. My dad was right. I did break my mother's heart. Now as a mother of a wonderful girl, I want to do everything I can to protect her. I'm scared that her and I won't have a good relationship when she is older. I don't want her and I to be at each other's throats like my mother and I. I want to raise a real family and I never want to expose them to everything I went through. I'm envious of the friends that I have that have amazing parents that dote on them and they take them for granted doing crazy shit. So this is a reverse of the question. But I need to get this out because I've never really told anyone the whole truth about myself. I never really caused trouble as a kid. I would pretty much ride my bike and play music throughout most of my childhood. Being a kid was great. My parents were, and still are phenomenal, loving and extremely decent people. At age 13 I discovered weed and began smoking here and there. I never got into trouble for it because it was never a problem. Somewhere in between 19 to 22, sorry for the vagueness, but I'm honestly not really sure, I began to explore with different substances and began drinking alcohol. Throughout all of this I was still able to get away with everything because on the outside, everything was still normal and I was a normal kid / young adult just growing up. During that time I had a jaw injury and ended up having 2 surgeries and multiple types of treatments. For the pain, since none of the doctors ever prescribed me anything, I took it upon myself and started buying low-dose Percocets. I found that I really liked the feeling they gave me aside from the fact that they relieved my pain. After a while the dose wasn't enough and I needed an upgrade. I manipulated my parents, mostly my mom, to give me money so that I could buy 30 milligrams oxys to help with the pain. She obliged because the last thing she would ever think of was that I was using them to get high. Knowing that they were on my side so to say, I used this toward my advantage. I manipulated them for everything from money to letting me do absolutely nothing all day because I was in pain. I even went so far as to have my mom take me to go buy the pills while she waited in the car. About another year passes and I have a friend that I find out is addicted to heroin because of some back surgeries he had had in the past. I decide to try it. This is where the infamous downward spiral comes into play. I begin using both heroin and oxys, pretty much any pharmaceutical that I can get my hands on, along with weed, alcohol and almost any other illicit substance there is. I start noticing that money is becoming somewhat of an issue and I need to figure some sort of solution out so I could keep up with my habit. I begin to steal from family members like it's nobody's business. Expensive watches, rings, pearls, literally anything I can get my hands on that will make a buck so I could support my habit. All the while, I continue to use the love they have for me as a weapon against them as they never suspected me of stealing anything. It was all simply misplaced. A while after this is going on, I get accepted to a university in Tennessee. I decide that, in order to make some extra money and be able to essentially do these drugs for free, I start to sell pills / weed. pretty much whatever I could get my hands on. I would tell my parents that I wanted to come home for the weekend. They would buy the plane ticket, and when I'd come home maybe spend about a total of 6 hours out of 3 to 4 days home, and the rest of the time out partying and getting high. On the way back to school I would take copious amounts of drugs with me on the plane. I did this several times, and I was never caught. Honestly, looking back, I have no idea how I was never caught. Anyway, I spent the days pretty much getting high and selling drugs. School was definitely not a priority at that time, even though my parents literally paid for every cent while I was up there. After a few months of being there I end up getting set up by the cops and being arrested. This is the first time in my life that I had ever been in any sort of trouble, and I was pretty freaked out with what could happen. I was charged with 3 separate felonies and I decided that it would help my case if I went to a rehab facility in another state. This rehab ended up costing about $150K. Not even 2 days after I got out and returned home, I got high and pretty much picked up where I left off. Fast forward about almost a year and I get into a massive car accident while driving under the influence. I ended up paralyzing a grandmother and nearly killing her granddaughter. The other 4 cars that were involved had broken arms, broken ankles, etc. The officers on the scene were highway patrols. It was a state road, and it just so happened that the main cop on the scene was a drug and alcohol specialist. State law requires that when there is a serious injury, a mandatory urine/blood/DUI assessment be done at the scene. I never had to do any of that. I simply got a reckless driving ticket and was sent home. I had drugs in the car at the time. Before I went to see if everyone else involved was okay, I stashed whatever I had somewhere nearby. After the ordeal, I convinced my mom to take me back to the scene of the accident so I could retrieve said stash. This ended up turning into a very large lawsuit that ended up being settled about a year and $400K later. I ended up back in rehab so I could get my parents off my back about 5 months later. During that time, I would constantly sneak out to go buy alcohol because I figured out how their drug screening routine worked. I ended up getting caught twice and signed myself out to move back home. Some time passed, and during a July 4th weekend we went to a friend's summer home about an hour away. I ended up stealing my mum's car and drove the hour back, and then went to a ghetto to buy a lot of heroin. The plan was test the product and then get back on the road to make the drive down. I ended up blacking out at the wheel about 4 minutes into the drive. I woke up to the fire rescue knocking on my window because I had apparently ran off the road and hit a fire hydrant. I had needles, dope and everything it would take to put me in jail for a very long time just literally under the seat. I lost my wallet in the car and the officers proceeded to look for it and somehow never found all of the bad stuff. While this is going on, the paramedics tell me that they need to take me to the hospital because I'm overdosing and they can't let me go home in that condition. In the ambulance I end up calling my mom and telling her that I crashed and am more likely going to jail after I'm released from the hospital. Freaking out is an understatement for how they must have felt. After all is said and done, I only get a ticket for reckless driving again. Oh, and about a $200 charge for county property damage. After this, I start seeing that this downward spiral isn't going to stop until I end up in some sort of prison or dead. I decide that I need to make a change in my life. Although this change has come an extremely great price, various relapses and even more struggles, I'm proud to say that I'm now working for my father's company and I'm on the road to opening my own business. I guess the point of this whole thing was that I to this day do not understand how my parents never gave up on me. I literally used their love as a weapon and caused them physical, monetary, emotional, and psychological damage, some of which is irreparable. I'm truly grateful to have had them by my side through all of this, and I'm forever in debt to them. I look back at some of the atrocities that I caused, and I can't believe that that was actually me. Side note, there are a lot of details from throughout the years that have been left out simply because I would have to type about 5 to 7 times the amount that I just have. I was just talking about this with my mom the other day actually. Way TLDR. It's about dropping out of university for a girl and throwing away all the education they paid for. I didn't at any time knife for her or demand tree fiddy from anyone. Preamble. I have a wonderful relationship with both of my parents. They love me very much, and I love them very much. We talk regularly, and I love seeing them on the rare occasion when we can cross the country to be together. But sometimes we make mistakes that we can't undo, and disappointment can last forever. My parents worked very hard when I was a kid to send me to private schools. I got a wonderful education, I had amazing opportunities, and I was a generally happy and well-off kid. My parents took education very seriously. They both got multiple college degrees from private universities, and they absolutely expected their sons to make even better of themselves. Neither of their parents on either side went to college except for my dad's dad, who didn't finish, and they always drove home the importance of college and education for our future. I was the eldest, and I took school seriously, but not too seriously. I was smart enough to be bored and disengaged, and I tended to focus on extracurricular activities to the exclusion of homework. But I tested like a freak, and my grades were never bad, they were just occasionally below expectations. Graduated from HS with a 3.6 to largely on the back of app and electives. Thank God for the SAT and ACT, my college career wasn't ruined. This was a direct quote from around the dinner table at home. I applied to 12 colleges and got declined by 2, Princeton and Yale, waitlisted by 2, Harvard and Stanford, and accepted to the other 8, Amherst, Williams, Wesleyan, Trinity, Berkeley, Penn, St. John's, and Reed. My mother was ecstatic. When the letter from Amherst got there, she almost couldn't wait long enough to bring it into my room. She was visibly shaking. She was so excited. My dad was excited, but I'd spurned his alma mater, and he was confused by the fact that I was looking largely in New England when I had every opportunity to go somewhere like Hawaii, or California, or Florida for God's sake. Freeze your preppy balls off might have come up once or twice. All this was right on track as far as my parents were concerned. All the time, effort, and money they'd dropped on 12 years of expensive, private, boarding schools was paying off. And then I met her. She was my HS sweetheart, and she was going to go to Oregon State University to become a vet. And, like any lovesick 18-year-old boys wont to do, I decided to change my whole world to be with her. I figured by going to Reed in Portland I'd be close enough and that would work. I hadn't counted on the culture shock of going from a conservative private boarding school to the most liberal of liberal arts colleges in America. I lasted a whopping 8 hours. There's a whole story right there waiting to be told. The sound of my mom's voice when I told her I wasn't cut out for Reed was one of the worst things I've ever heard outside of a hospital. I'm sure they could see the direction this was going, but they didn't know how to intervene. I ended up applying late to Portland State University and barely had time to register for classes. And by barely, I mean I registered at 4:30 p.m. on the first Monday of classes and my options were somewhat limited. There was even less surprise when I decided over winter break to transfer to OSU. What surprised my parents was when they found out that in my 19-year-old wisdom I'd decided to propose to her. Words were said. Feelings were hurt. A child refused to listen to reason. In the end, I married her at 19, just a couple of weeks before my sophomore year was about to start. My dad walked up during rehearsal dinner, clapped me on the back, and said, "Tomorrow you're doing an adult thing. You're becoming a man, and I respect that. And a man pays for his own college." And then he walked away. I had a job, and I knew that we needed a steady income more than we needed me to focus on a degree, so I dropped out and found better and better jobs. I never took another university class again. My marriage lasted 11 years until we divorced, just shy of 8 years ago, on reasonably amicable terms. We have a beautiful daughter who's turning 13. Before I know it, my parents love their oldest granddaughter more than anything and wouldn't trade her for the world. But I flushed away so much money and opportunity and potential. I had so many options, so many chances, and I didn't capitalize on it when I had the chance. My parents love me, I have no doubt. But my mom can't think about what could have been, perhaps should have been, without a sick pit in her stomach and a look in her eyes that makes me burn with shame. She'll always love me, but almost 20 years later I know she'll never forgive me for throwing my best chance for the future and the opportunities they struggled so hard to give me away. I'm sorry I'm not a parent, but this is something my mom and I both can't forgive my brother for. He was diagnosed with autism when he was 2. My mom quit her 80k/year job so that she could take him to doctor's appointments, make every meal from scratch, to avoid his dietary restrictions, and tutor him. He had always been a smart kid, he just has a hard time with speech. He was 8 when this happened. My mom and I were a little torn up over the death of our 20-year-old cat that she had gotten before I was born. But a few months later, I found a kitten in the rain outside the library. She was only about 2.5 weeks old, so I took her home. My mom and I, but mostly my mom, raised her. She would get up every 2 to 3 hours to feed her through the night and take care of her all morning. I would play with her and care for her after I got home from school. We put a lot of time and love into this kitten. One day, we caught my autistic brother carrying her around in a pillowcase. My mom flipped shit a little bit, but we sat him down and told him that he could hurt her very badly by doing that. He is good at knowing his restrictions, so we told him he wasn't allowed to touch her until she was full grown. Everything went well for another month and a half, until one night we found her on her side struggling to breathe. I picked her up so we could rush her to the emergency vet, and she was bleeding from the mouth. She died soon after we got there. An autopsy showed that one of her ribs punctured her lung and another punctured her heart. We found out that night that my brother had gotten mad, so he put her in a pillowcase and dropped her from the top of his closet. It was at least a 6-foot drop. He did it on purpose. I don't think he meant to kill her, but his intention was to hurt her. This may not be as traumatic as some of the other stories in this thread, but my mom will never forgive him. She loved that cat immensely. Here are some pics of Kaylee. http imgur.com//01pks. Edit. Another album of Kaylee. Just cause she was the coolest faking cat ever, and I miss the shit out of her. http imgur.com//cvnvu. I married a woman 8 years older than I was who had teenage kids when I was 26. I had a 4-year-old son from an ex-girlfriend. 5 years went by with no issues, then her 17-year-old son started stealing shit from us. He stole my Xbox, 2 TVs, and computer, all within the same day, and the neighbors seen him doing it. They thought he was moving out, so they didn't think much of it. He tried to say it was someone else. Still has yet to admit to it, but I know it was him, because this is how stupid his friends and him were. I didn't cancel live, since it was prepaid, and just made a new username. I invited my old username to the party, and asked, is Ryan with you? And they replied, no, he is with Jenny, who was his girlfriend at the time. It ended up being his best friend who was constantly over. That I could have forgiven him for, only after he replaced everything. Shortly after it came out from my son that he had been touching him down there, his mother argued that my son could just be making it up. I told her that he was no longer allowed over when my son was there, and I was going to confront him about it next time he was over. Well, there wasn't a next time, because he got arrested for rapping a girl with 3 other guys when she was passed out at a party. I refused to pay for any lawyer for the little sheet. His mother actually got a second job to do so. Thankfully we had never kept our finances together. He only 2 years. Between that time, when we cleaned out his room, there was a CD spindle that I went through and there was child porn on them. I turned them into the cops and nothing ever came of it. I told his mother that he was never allowed over at all, and if I seen him again then I would beat his faking ass and make sure it violated his parole and he went right back to prison. That stupid bitch kept sneaking him into the house while I was at work and asleep to feed him and spend time with him when he got out. Neighbors told me of that, and she denied it to my face. I was already getting ready to file for divorce. Out of boredom I got a program that recorded movement from my webcam, and sure enough, that faker was in my house on camera. Then during divorce we found that his mother opened up several credit cards in my name without my consent after I had filed, then ran them up. Her parents paid them off so I wouldn't press charges. I can't forgive him or her. I'm sure he will be locked up soon enough again. Not a parent, but the child that had to go through everything. My older brother started getting into drugs when he was really young. Started smoking at probably around 11 behind my stepdad and mom's backs when he went over to visit my cousin. Not so bad, but he eventually ended up doing meth and drinking a lot by the time he was 16. My parents just thought he was skinny because he was going through a growing phase. I knew, but never said anything because I didn't want to get my brother into trouble. He was my person. He was my everything. I knew he was doing it because our real dad wouldn't let him move in with him. By the time he hit his junior year of high school, he had spiraled down as low as he could get. My parents were both busy and left my sister and I alone with him. He was mean, and I'm not going to elaborate. I went from being the person he always said he'd protect to being a slave. I was quiet about it because I loved him. Shit broke out when I finally told my parents 3 years after he got sent to juvie and left home. They knew what he had done to himself. They just didn't know what he had done to me. My mom didn't believe me. My stepdad did. I still feel like I'm the reason for all of their fights and the reason they don't sleep in a bed together anymore at times. I went through a lot of suicidal phases and severe anxiety, but I started going through counseling at my university last year. It's worked for me, and I've never been better. I have a somewhat relationship with a boy I love, even though I have a hard time getting close to people. I have less anxiety attacks, and no longer feel guilty about everything. When people scream, I don't burst into tears immediately. I've got a good life ahead of me that I'm not afraid of. But every moment my brother, who has somewhat cleaned himself up, is around my stepfather, I can see the fury in his eyes. He hates his stepson for what he put me through, and he'll never forgive him. I'm the kid who will never get my mom's forgiveness. I was a weird kid with no friends, and was chubby, and was dealing with watching my dad go through chemotherapy. He passed in 8th grade, and it threw me off pretty bad, so I wasn't too mentally stable. I've had depression and anxiety since I was in 4th grade, and have gotten better since, but none of these are excuses for what I did when I was 14, freshman year. I molested my older sister while she was sleeping for about a month, and she caught on after a while and confronted me, and since that day I've felt like a monster. I know if my dad was here I can't imagine the disappointment he'd feel having his own son destroy his little angel. One day my mom and my sister were arguing, and my sister broke down and told my mom what I had done. She was furious, but took the church therapy route instead of huge punishment, and I'm so thankful for that, even though I damn near deserve death in my eyes. I have changed so much since, but ever since that day I can't get the thought of what I did out of my head, and it has been the reason for a suicide attempt I tried 2 years ago. I wish I could go back and fix it, but I can't, and I will never get over what I did. This was 5 years ago and we have, for the most part, been doing well but definitely not good, and I know my mom will always love me, but neither her or my sister will ever fully forgive me, and I have to accept those consequences for my stupid actions. I will never forgive myself. Not a parent, but I actually know an event that my dad can't forgive me for. I know this because he told me so after the incident, so here we go. When I was in school I was one of the outcasts, overweight, bad skin, and I didn't fit in with the other kids in my school. I was, and still am, a goth with piercings and tattoos that grew up in the middle of a shit ton of cornfields in Ohio, so you can imagine how well I fit in. Well, my second year of high school, grade 10, I had a terrible problem with the jocks in my school. Beatings, name calling and other forms of school age torture were my everyday life. Well, there were 2 guys who were above everybody else. They made it their job to try to break me. One of their favorite methods for this involved one of them coming behind me and crouching down, but instead of the other just pushing me, they would punch me, and whichever one was crouched would stand up at the same time, causing me to flip and sometimes actually land on my neck or head. After a few of these incidents I got fed up with reporting what was happening with no action, even though my school had a full camera system, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. My dad had always told me that if I had to protect myself there was no shame in that, but I should never strike first, and that's exactly what I did. I went out and bought a pair of steel-toed combat boots and started wearing them to school every day, but I made sure that people wouldn't be able to tell I was wearing them. I even learned to walk lighter in them so that the sound didn't change. Well, one day the opportunity I had planned for presented itself. I saw the guy who normally did the punching coming down the hall, not flanked by the other one. Sure enough, a glance over my shoulder showed the other coming up behind me. I waited till I saw the guy coming toward me draw back his fist, then I spun around and soccer kicked his friend who had crouched down at that point right in his jaw as hard as I could. Being about 6 foot tall and weighing around 250 pounds, I had a pretty powerful kick that was amplified by a set of steel toes, so not only did I watch 3 of his teeth go flying down the hallway, I felt his jaw break. Cops and ambulance are called, parents show up, and if it wasn't for the camera footage showing that it wasn't the first time I had been attacked, I would have wound up with assault charges, but I only wound up with a 2-day suspension. Dad figured out that I planned everything as soon as we got home. He told me what I had done was very wrong and that if I ever took pleasure in hurting someone again, he would never speak to me again. But then he smiled and said it was a nice kick and that he was proud of me for standing up for myself. I never had problems with the jocks after they saw me hospitalize one of their Stalinabakas, and he had to have 3 surgeries to reconstruct his jaw. In the end, I felt bad for what I had done and apologized a few years later when I ran into him at a bar. I'm not the parent, I'm the daughter, but I think it's safe to say my mother will never have anything to do with me or my children ever again. I sued her and won. I would have never called her the warm and fuzzy kinda mom, more of a narcissistic type. I always longed for her to be nurturing to me, but deep down I knew it wouldn't change. When I was pregnant at 22 with my son, her response was to tell me to get an abortion. People do it all the time. I did it. Thank God for abortions. Needless to say, she wasn't a warm and fuzzy grandma to my son or my daughter born 2 years later. For example, I wasn't allowed over with the kids on the weekends, cause that was her alone time with her husband. And for a short period of time I shared a car with my husband. I'd call and ask my mom, who lived 5 minutes away, if she could grab me a gallon of milk while she was out, and I'd give her the cash. She'd hardly ever help me out and bitched and complained about how it was out of the way for her. One day I finally got fed up after a fight we had about me asking her to take my 2-year-old son for a bit so I could wrap his Christmas gifts. We didn't talk for a year, and that's when I decided, mostly out of spite, it was time to do something about the money she wrongfully took from me years earlier. My grandfather, mother's father, bought a house for me as an investment when I was 2. He paid cash and the deed was in my name. I didn't know this growing up, and after my grandparents died and my parents divorced, she decided to sell. She had a lawyer forge documents and sell the house under her name before I turned 18. When I found out about this, even though I should have, I wasn't mad. She told me she'd give me half because she thought that was fair, and she'd give it to me at her discretion. So long story short, she didn't hold up her end of the bargain. I sued and won. Pretty sure I'll never hear from her again. But I can't say there isn't a huge part of me that just wants to know she loves me and misses me and longs to have a meaningful relationship with my kids. And I pray to God I never become a parent like her. I'm gonna take my redid virginity here. It's taken a long while, and I have no idea why, but hell, I'm doing it. I'm turning this slightly onto why I'll never see my family again, and I'll never forgive them. Here goes. I'm 26. I was born to my mum and dad, and when 5, my younger brother was born. Mum kept the house running, and dad did his best to earn some money. We had little, but they made sure we never went without. It didn't take me many years to realize we were poor, but I was astute enough to see that they did their best for what we had. Anyway, my parents instilled a good work ethic in me, and as I grew up I was really smart in school, always top of the class, and eventually got into the best secondary school in the UK. Not boasting or anything, just throwing details out there. Amongst all of the geeks I was no longer top of the top, but I did well, had potential, all of that business. I never really got on brilliantly with my brother. I was quiet and creative, liked to read, and he was more for screaming, running around, smashing stuff, basically like any hyped up kid. Nonetheless, I suppose we had a fairly average brotherly relationship, all things considered. I was forced by circumstance to grow up fast, which is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because when still young and malleable I was able to look more openly on the world, and a curse because being naturally quiet and empathetic I could see the cracks in what seemed like a fairly normal life. My dad had suffered from depression for the good part of his life, and it mirrored mine alarmingly, same to school and everything, but where I qualified and left to work, he quit, got nothing, and did his own thing. Eventually he fell into a slump and got into drugs. Note, there are lots of drug mentions in this, but despite being the cause of so much shit in my life, I'm very pro drugs. Like anything in life, just don't be an idiot with them. Nothing with needles, no crack, meth, PCP, no cocaine if you can help it, not because of any ideological disapproval, it just makes people act like assholes and talk shit. If you want to try drugs, do it sensibly, dude. It's simple. Now, my dad had an awful family growing up, born again Baptists, think quite Westboro Baptist Church, but without the picket signs, and I don't blame him for trying anything to escape. Hell, these people kidnapped me as a baby, another story for another time. Before he met my mum, he got into heroin, only for a short while, but as is the wont of fate, long enough to do the damage. He ended up sharing a needle one time and got several strains of hepatitis. But of all the incredible confluences of fate, my mum happened to have a total genetic immunity to hepatitis, very rare and incredibly fortuitous. Dad kept it under control through moderately healthy living, but as I reached my teens, it was catching up worse and worse with him. Eventually, cirrhosis settled like a cloud when I was about 13, and from there on it was a different world, day by day. Things didn't disintegrate or anything, but they changed. Dad knew he would eventually die, and turned to an idea that could guarantee some money for the family for once he was gone. Yep, drugs. Now, we didn't strictly do a Walton Jess, we grew very high quality cannabis. You'd think this awkward in the garden of a terraced house in a residential London street, but you'd be wrong. A few years in cirrhosis turned to cancer. My brother was in a different secondary school as I was nearing the end of my time at mine, and he'd become quite the opposite to me. Lots of skipping school, fights with teachers, all the bad stuff, really. Dad was barely lucid on pain medication towards the end, so he couldn't do anything. Mum obviously was busy with dad, and there was no way I would be listened to. So, dad died. It was a good thing, because he was suffering like nobody should have to suffer, and he had a good death surrounded by friends and his favorite music whilst we made him comfortable. Obviously, we all mourned, and I stepped up ready to be the patriarchal figure. Luckily I had the backing and support of my girlfriend of 1 year anniversary a couple of days after his death. So festive, or else I have no idea what I'd have done. Luckily I just carried on as normal. Mum takes to a friend of my dad's, a typical dumb bloke construction type, hit first, don't bother asking questions later. 2 months later he beats the shit out of me in front of my mum and girlfriend. I'm the poster boy for being lover not fighter, for no reason barring being a dumb thug who does ridiculous amounts of coke. Now, mum doesn't bat an eyelid. This is not good. I feared for my safety and left the home, moving in with my partner and her mum. Mum eventually ends up marrying him. Now, she could have gotten my brother the help he obviously needed since dad dying, but instead he runs wild, getting kicked out of school, then a second one, and then not having any schooling and getting 0 qualifications. At some point new husband gets violent with my brother, who by now is strong enough from all the gang fights, drugs, and running from police to provide a challenge. Insidious husband convinces mum to move him out. She does. I'm still in contact with her at this point, and very sporadically my brother. She still bails him out of the stupid shit he gets mixed up in whilst his behavior affects everyone else. Like after giving several stees to the daughter of some common one-ape gangster, mum's brakes get cut and windows get broken. Yay. Lunacy. Now, my brother kept on with this girl. He's about 16 at this point, and used to use different stories to explain his bad behavior towards her, like beating her up or taking her shoes from her at night in town, so she couldn't go home, and had to follow him whilst he berated her. As I mentioned, he used to explain his behavior away, always an excuse. My parents beat me. My parents made me steal as a baby to buy money for crack. Almost anything unbelievable was lied with. However, one lie made me break off contact completely. I only behaved like this because my dad used to molest me. I went incandescent with rage. Probably would have killed him if I'd had the chance. Didn't speak from 2007. 2012. Mum stayed in touch, and I continued to not be welcome in the home. Lost touch a few times because I was in stark opposition to her choices of being with an asshole and supporting a piece of shit child. Who knew? It turned out that the husband was violent since before the marriage and eventually went too far when my brother was visiting and ended up very nearly being dismembered by my brother wielding a katana. The husband was kicked out of the house and permanently ordered away by the police. Divorce proceedings filed. Finally, brother and I tentatively buried the hatchet at this point. It lasted about 8 months. At this point, my brother does lots of drugs, still, and so does mum. Mum has 2 boyfriends amongst his older drug friends, one of whom she is still with. Now, I said earlier I'm an advocate for drugs, but not like this. A day in their life involves getting up, opening some ultra strong homeless booze, having a joint or 2, and indulging in anything from the list of cocaine, acid, 2-set, speed, MDMA, methadone, ketamine, Valium, and plenty more besides. None of the ultra nasty stuff, as if that makes it better. So, eventually in August 2012, things come to a head. Mum has chosen everything that has happened, and for over 7 years I've been ignored despite trying to drag the family out of the spiral they are in. My brother gets angry, as is common. He decides to start breaking stuff at the family home, and a neighbor calls the police. When they arrive, he decides to square up to and threaten the female police officer. Bam. Arrested. Let out later that day. He then goes and pushes over a brick wall in front of someone's house and is arrested for a second time and kept in the cells overnight. When charged and let out the next day, he returns to the scene of the crime and is arrested a third time for witness intimidation. Great. My partner works in probation and is doing a degree in psychology. She realizes that due to the link between me and my family, and despite both of us having clean records, their criminal records instantly bar her from a great swathe of the work she had considered in the future. That's it. I got the family together and told them that I couldn't take babysitting them any longer and trying to mitigate the insane amount of damage that followed them around. I made explicitly clear what they had done, what I thought of them and their actions. There were plenty of recriminations and calls of abandonment, but I was done with them. I can't remember it all verbatim, but I definitely called them omnishambles. And that was the last time we talked. I broke off contact with mutual friends. All the ones I cared about most left them behind ages ago. I moved away, and I haven't looked back. From what I hear, they all constantly do coke. My brother likes to smoke crack, and has been boasting about rap. I can safely say that leaving the family behind was the best thing I've ever done. The last 16 months have been the best of my life and I've been happier than ever before. All it took was uprooting about 95% of what made me me. Changed my name too. It was definitely the way to go. I will never see them again. They are no longer the family I had, and I don't miss it at all. That was short-ended points, but it's the crux of my life story with a shitty family. Want any more details? Ask away. TLDR, left mental family behind because they are terrible drug users. TLDR. So, the short version of the story is that my eldest went through a massive meltdown and dragged his mother and I along with him. So sorry for the extreme length of this post. Long version, I met my stepson when he was 3. Only child of an only child, only grandchild, only great grandchild. He was pretty used to having the world revolve around him. He told me once that he was the most important person in the family because everyone would die without him. I talked to him right then and there about perceived importance and being self-centered. So the drama unfolds over 3 years. He is, by this time, 14 and has developed a reputation for lying constantly. In the course of year 1, I broke my wrist twice, leading to eventual surgery and a month-long convalescence. In November, at the end of my convalescence, I get a message from the girlfriend of the guy that my wife was planning to meet up with for fake news, telling me to get a leash on my wife. I check around, and it turns out my wife had been having a series of affairs while abandoning me at home with the kids and accusing me of cheating. So, we start the divorce in December and together calmly explain to him how we are all staying in the area, he will see everyone, etc. I tell him that he will have greater responsibilities, but greater privilege as the divorce progresses. In February of year 2, my ex comes by the house while he's watching his siblings and asks to borrow his iPhone, one of those privileges he got. He hovers and keeps trying to take the phone from her, so she tells him to sit his ass down and tell her what he's hiding. He says nothing, but remember that he makes a habit of lying. So she checks his phone and finds that he's been Skype messaging with someone. Thousands of messages. All of them are cross-gender sexual roleplay, all with some adult male that neither the ex nor I knew. We sit him down and have a long talk about how being gay is fine, but that exchanging messages with grown men online is dangerous. I explain pedophile grooming to him, and we take all of the information from him. No more computer, no more iPhone, he has no web access. A month later I check his cell phone to find that he was now texting several men the same incredibly intense sex play. I take his phone, I destroy all information on it. He was no longer allowed to stay at home to watch his siblings. He had a new handset, new number with no way to transfer the numbers. 2 months later, he had their numbers again and was going from the new phone. 2 months after that, I catch him with an iPad that he bought by taking games from my house and trading them to the local GameStop. Each time, the same content is on there. Gentle talks become firm reminders, become absolute mandates, become spittle and profanity-laden screams as I begged/demanded he not drag us down this road. I was terrified that one of these men would convince him to meet them and that he would then be gone. A week later, my ex catches him with another iPad. He's wearing her underwear. All of this was things he'd stolen from her room. She smacks him around and sends him to live with me until she can calm down. 3 weeks later, on a hunch I check his bags and find his plans on how he's going to go meet up with one of these guys. I hit the roof, I scream, I threaten, I entreat, I beg. It's Saturday and I resolve that as soon as I can get to a clinic, I'm checking myself into therapy. He had already been seeing a therapist at this time. 2 days later, on Christmas Day, he packs his things and tries to leave. I catch him as he's going out the door. I pull him back in. He tells me he doesn't think I care, and somewhere in there the last vestige of what held me snapped, and I tumbled into the gaping maw of rage and madness. I have 2 other kids that I have to must care for, and the strain of trying to protect him from what he's getting himself into as well as making sure that his sexual problems don't get taken out on his siblings finally snaps my restraint. I crossed the line. I knew when I did it, and I let him go. Called the police immediately afterward. I'm in cuffs. My ex takes all the kids to her place. When I'm finally released I go home and shake uncontrollably until I finally pass out. 2 weeks later, January of year 3, his mother drops him off at my place and tells me that her boyfriend was missing $40 and they found $20 on the son and haven't found the rest. The next morning my friend that stayed the night, I won't be alone with my oldest now, tells me that money is missing from her purse. I stop my son and eventually he gives me the entire sum of money he's taken. $382 in all, which is enough to get a bus ticket to somewhere. Since then, he's been in therapy the whole time. His mother will not send him to a care facility as she doesn't believe it's that bad. I keep catching him with iPads and MP3 players, all of which are loaded with porn. His drawings are primarily of his ox-sucking dicks. His friends at school loan him phones so he can keep in touch with the guys that brought him here, and there's dick all I can do to stop it. He doesn't come to see me anymore. Every time I see him, I find something new, that he has turned to this pursuit of being victimized. Note, if he had a boyfriend his age, I wouldn't care. Gay, straight, all just part of a spectrum to me, but he has turned it into a disorder. So, I'll never forgive him for bringing us to this point. The drain of caring for so long and that absolute meltdown. I had a hard time expressing emotions before. I was abused as a child myself, and it left me rather restrained. Since that night, I barely even feel emotions. They are only now starting to return enough that I can truly engage with someone. So, even though I'm the bad guy, I'll never forgive him for making me that. I just want my kids safe. Some quick background info. I didn't have any sort of relationship with my son until he was a young adult. Sometimes things just work out that way. He was raised away from me for mistakes I made in the past. Anyways, I was a consultant of sorts for a company on a big project. I didn't answer to any of the bosses there really, though I did have to answer to their boss. Unbeknownst to me, or him for that matter, my son had moved close to where I was staying and had gotten in with this group of hippies who hated the establishment, hung out in the woods, shit like that. Real hippie dippy stuff. They got wind of the project I was consulting for, which admittedly was not good for the environment, but it was for the military and top secret kind of stuff, so I was surprised anyone knew about it, much less these hippies. I didn't know it at the time, but my son was among the number of hippies who came to disrupt the project, and they actually managed to destroy enough that the project was set back a number of years and had to be restarted from scratch. I learned my son had been involved, and I was furious. To think that he got in with this group of people and set out to destroy government property, I couldn't be more embarrassed, and admitted to no one that he was my son, though my boss did find out. My boss was furious and wanted to literally destroy my son. I mean, he had caused the project like $1 billion. I convinced my boss that we shouldn't press charges, that my son obviously possessed certain tools and talents that could be useful to us if we could get him to see the error of his ways. I had become something of a public figure for the project, and a lot of people hated me. When I managed to confront my son about everything, I decided to tell him the truth. I told him he was my son, but by then I had already cut his hand off, so he was pretty pissed. He yelled "no" a couple of times and made a real ugly face. Then he ran away. So I mean, I love the kid, but I'm pretty embarrassed that he's A so winny, but shit man, he's got nothing on me when I was that age, and B that he blew up the Death Star. I was a complete beach when I was a teenager and have done a lot of things I was not proud of. I got involved with a lot of the wrong crowd, slept with and hung out with questionable guys, while lying to my mother, the whole 9 yards. Well, on this band trip my junior year of high school, it was the climax of my rebellious days, and also the climax of the broken relationship I had with my mom during that time. That band trip, I bought weed and alcohol on it, because the other upperclassmen asked me to, and I knew exactly where to get it. Things happened, and I was asked to leave that private school and all that. Anyway, my mom came on that band trip as like a chaperone, or whatever, and I was complete beach to her the whole time, so she didn't let me ride back on the bus with everyone else. Well, we got in a fight, and I said something so rude that neither of us can ever forget. I was commenting on how most moms just give their kids money and tell them to have a good time, and she said she wasn't most moms. Then I said, well, most moms don't have to take a handful of pills to get through the day. She's been struggling with anxiety and depression for a while. She slapped me pretty hard for that, and I don't blame her. I regret so much of my teenage years, but being a beach to my mother was the worst thing I could have done. My mom is absolutely amazing and has supported me through everything I have done. She picked all my teachers growing up and sent me to a private school so I could be challenged and grow up to be really smart and stuff. She has always financially supported me and completely spoiled me. She's always been my #1 fan. I love my mom so much, and we have a wonderful relationship now, but I'm sure that phrase still stays with her. Edit. Some words. TLDR. I was a beachy teenager that told my mom most moms don't have to take a handful of pills to get through the day, even though she's been struggling with anxiety and depression for a while. Only mention this story because my mom was a better mother to my cousin than her bio mom. Anyway, she moved into our house when she was 11 or 12. Her mother was horribly abusive and her father an orgy. For a while things were fine until, as a teenager, she started throwing massive parties when she was supposed to be watching my sister and I top, less ladies, blaring music till all hours of the night, you know, the usual. After my parents started coming down on her, she split, just took a bus to a nearby city and disappeared. We would hear from her every once in a while. She got heavily addicted to meth and did some horrible stuff. Eventually she got put into jail for kidnapping a dude and beating his financial information out of him, then stealing all his money. She got put in jail about 6 hours away from us. In jail she got sober, got out of jail, then relapsed. Got pregnant with her drug addict boyfriend. I'm not sure if she used during the pregnancy or not. Then he went to jail, so she moved back to our city. She got an apartment, was clean, and got into contact with us again. We started getting closer with her again, forgiving her for her previous transgressions. We helped her out, bought toys and food for the baby after he was born. Helped raise him, to be honest. My mother became incredibly close to him. And to be honest, I loved that kid. It was a highlight of my life being a part of the beginning of his life. Then she moved to a new basement suite, a grungy gross place. She found a new boyfriend, and then relapsed, and lost the child. Now, as it sits, I will never get to see him again, and I will never forgive her for it. And I sure as hell hope me ma'am won't either. I can't describe how terrible I feel never getting to see him again. I lost something great. I lost the chance to see someone I love grow. Not my child, however. I think this could go here. I knew a family growing up that had 2 daughters. The mother had the first daughter with another man, and then married her husband, who then both had the second daughter. The firstborn, we call her Amanda, was treated like shit by her stepdad, and though I'm only about 7 in this story and Amanda is 10 to 11, I see this man being mean to Amanda, and not to his daughter all the time. The younger one, Hallie, is constantly spoiled by him and her mother. This is in 1997 or so, and eventually my parents go over there less and less for reasons unknown. In 2000, we moved to another city and lose contact. Then about 4 years later my mom regains contact and finds out they are running their own restaurant, so we go down and visit. The food was horrible and the place was completely empty when we were there during dinner time. I don't even want to be there, and the younger daughter, Hallie, is the only other kid. Hallie is about 11 and Amanda would be around 14. When we leave the restaurant I ask my parents where Amanda is, and they tell me that she's at home, and then we go there. I find her downstairs typing on the computer. Apparently, her mom and stepdad caught her doing yellow jackets, some type of methamphetamine, and forced her to write a 4-page paper on how drugs can affect your life. That was the last time I saw her or her family. A couple years went by and my mom was sitting in the living room on the phone with Amanda's mom. I hear her talking about Amanda, so I ask when she hangs up. Amanda ran away multiple times soon after our visit years ago. She got into other drugs, got caught at school, was caught sending dirty pictures to boys, and having sex with them. She moved out by 15, and then become a ward of the state at 16, after telling CPS her stepdad had sexual assaulted her when she was younger. No one believed her. They all knew she hated her stepdad and the adults seemed to think she was the hateful, mean one. A couple days later she took it back, saying she made the whole thing up. She was still emancipated and lost all contact with her mom, stepdad and sister. No one has heard from her in years. I'm a father to 3 boys between the ages of 4 and 14. I don't think I could ever not forgive them for something they did. May one day do. I'm not perfect. I never claim to be. I've made some bad decisions in life, but for me to never forgive one of my boys for something they did, or may one day do, is nearly impossible for me to consider. They would have to do some Hitler-like level of evil to others or each other for me to never forgive them. Parents aren't perfect either. My wife and I do our best to make the best decisions, and try to help guide our children in the right direction, to keep them safe, provide food for them, and keep them as healthy as possible. We are not religious, but I've always tried to encourage my children to use the golden rule in all aspects of life. Our job as parents is to watch over our children as they are young, to do the best we can, and hope that once they are old enough to be on their own, that we've given them enough to make good decisions, and take care of themselves, and possibly start their own families. Sometimes things happen, and the best thing to do is to learn from them and move on as best as possible and try to never make those mistakes again. For those parents who cannot forgive their children, I think you should take a look at yourself. When there were challenging moments in your child's life, did you do your best to guide them in the right direction? Being a responsible parent isn't easy. Once you're in it for the long haul. If you can't handle that, can't take it seriously, or you can't figure out a way for it all to work out for your children, then there's only one person to blame: you. I'm not a parent, but I'm a child, and I did something my father has never forgiven me for. I got my license at 16 and a half, and shortly after I got a job. I lived with my mother, who was a single parent, that worked one full-time job and another part-time job to make ends meet. I live in the suburbs and I really needed a car, because I had no other way of getting to work, and told my father and stepmother about this situation when I was at his house for my bi-weekly visit. I had saved up $1,500 throughout my childhood, but that was all I had, and I could not afford a semi-decent car on my own. My mother said she would not be able to help me much, but my father said he could help me afford a car. I told him I was looking at cars around $4,000 and under, and he thought that was a good idea. He asked if he could take me car shopping the next week and I happily obliged. The next week he called me up and said he'd found a few places we could go to look at used cars. I went with him to a bunch of places, but we could not find anything. Then, I found my dream car at the last place we went to visit. It was a 2000 Ford Escape in 2007, but it was priced at just under $8,000. My father said that maybe we could get the price down and that I should take it for a test drive. I happily agreed and immediately fell in love with the car. When we came back from the test drive, the car salesman sat us down and said the lowest he could go was $5,000 plus tax if I registered the car with them and got my plates there, which was another $600. My father said I should get the car, and I was ecstatic. We signed some sort of agreement that I would get the car, so the dealership would hold it while I got the money together, but afterwards my father decided to tell me that he could only contribute $1,000. He was going on his annual trip to Disney World the next week with my stepmom and half-sisters, which had already cost him $5,000 plus, and he said he needed to save his money for the vacation. I asked him why he would get me to sign some sort of agreement for a $5,000 plus car when he knew I only had $1,500 and he was only planning on contributing $1,000. He claimed I told him I had $4,000 saved up, which I never did. It was too late to get out of the deal for the car, and luckily my grandmother stepped up when she found out about what happened and paid the difference of over $3,000. I'm so thankful of her for doing this, but I was really annoyed with my father. When he came back from his vacation, I confronted him when I came to visit. I asked him why he did what he did, but he kept accusing me of being the one who lied. I never lied, and I don't know why my father would have ever thought that I had $4,000 saved up at that age. I was a 16-year-old high school student who was just starting their first job. I said that, which only pissed him off more, and he said I was ungrateful and started calling me names. I told my father that I did not want to see him anymore, and he told me he didn't care if that's what I wanted to do, so I got in my car and left. I have not talked to him since then, although I have seen him a few times at funerals for my other family members. I won't speak to him and have no desire to. He considers everything that happened to be my fault, but I found out afterwards that my stepmother was the one who told my father I had $4,000 saved up. She was always jealous that my father cared about me and hated me for it. She never really spoke to me, and I never told her anything about looking for a car or how much money I had saved up. I think she just lied to my father so he would spend more money on their children and none on me. Anyways, my father has never forgiven me, but that's fine with me because I would rather not have him in my life. It was his 21st birthday, a nice and sunny day in late spring. He was visiting home from university and my wife had baked cake with gummy bears the way she had always done it from his very first birthday on. We were sitting in our garden having tea and cake. He puts down his fork and puts on a very serious face. Mom, Dad, I have something to say. I think I have met the one. Of course we are happy for him and ask him what she's like. Dark brown eyes, like the earth in a flower pot, rather tall, and he's from Scotland. Sure, my wife and I were a little surprised that he's gay, but I love him, and if he loves man, and then I'm not gonna say anything about it. The reason why I hate him and can't forgive him is yet to come. He goes on by asking if it was fine if he brought him over for dinner sometime, and of course we let him. So, 2 weeks later on a Sunday evening we are having dinner with my son and his boyfriend. I have cooked meatloaf with mashed potatoes and we are drinking a little wine. As it is getting late, my son's boyfriend excuses himself. He has exams tomorrow and wants to do some last minute studying. He politely thanks for the dinner, kisses my son goodnight and walks to the front door. As he stands in the door he turns around one last time and asks if he can have about $3.50 for a cab. Only now did I realize that my son was dating an 8-story tall crustacean from the Paleozoic era. I yelled, "Goddamn Loch Ness monster, you ain't getting no $3.50 from me." I told my son to pack his things and leave immediately. How could I have failed so badly as a parent? This is probably going to get buried in the comments, but felt like I should share my experience. I didn't come from a rich family, but worked hard all my life and became very successful. Not only could I provide the very best for my family, but I also had enough left over to treat myself to my passion from time to time as well. My passion was all things cars, avid follower of r/autos. In the early 80s I was able to buy the car I always dreamed of, a Ferrari. Subtle, I know. It was beautiful, and it became a bonding point for my son and I. We would take it for drives on Sundays, wash it together, perform routine maintenance, etc. I pretty much dusted the thing with a diaper, a bit obsessed in retrospect. Like many of the examples in this thread, my son began to pull away from me and the things we used to enjoy together as he entered into his high school years. I guess we all go through that stage, but it was particularly hard for him as me and his mom were also going through a rough patch. Anytime she and I would fight he'd just shut down and shut everything out. I often handled family drama in a similar way, so he probably took it from me. It started out slow, detention for disrupting class, staying out late, but pretty soon he was failing classes and cutting school altogether. I wanted to reach out to him and help and try to get him back on the right path. I just couldn't get through to him, and it would always end in a screaming match, and it seemed that the more I tried to help the further away he got. One day we got into a really heated argument over his grades, and I was done being his buddy. I took his car away for a month. He repaid me by taking my GT 250 California Spider away from me forever. Ghost rode the car we spent so many hours bonding over straight into the woods. I've never been able to forgive him, not because the car was expensive and perfect, but because I've always seen it as him trying to destroy the time we spent together. But most of all I blame myself. I knew that Buddha kid was a bad influence. From a perspective of a son that believes his family is embarrassed and will not forgive. So to start, this is throwaway. I have done a lot of bad things in my life growing up. I was definitely the odd one of my family and never fit. I have always felt as though there is something wrong about me mentally, though. It's odd to say the least, as I notice all the issues about me, but cannot break them. I try over and over again, but when things go bad I become a different person. So growing up, I never had any issues arise till I was about 7. I noticed every day that I would cry. I was always hurting, and when anybody would say something just a bit offensive, I cried. Then the abuse started from my father. It started off small. A belt to my butt when I did something wrong, a slap to the face for being disrespectful. Then when I was 11, I played basketball with my dad, sister, brother, and my brother, and I lost. My dad threw it in my face, insulting me and boasting my sister with his words. I told him to shut up. I got thrown into a chalkboard, hit in the back of the head. I went upstairs and called the police. I never said anything. Just picked up the phone, dialed 911 and hung up. A police officer came and didn't do anything, as I didn't say anything, and my dad played it off cool. At some point during this time frame, I would spend a lot of time with my sister. One day I asked to show our privates to each other. Since then I've got a sick mind I can't run away from. I find my sister very attractive and get aroused by thoughts of her. As though I never perused it still creeps me out, but I can't block this desire. When I was 13 I saw my first pornographic material. It was exciting. It was all an accident as I was browsing the internet and the material popped up. I looked at it, and at that moment my younger sister had just seen what I was looking at. That was the first time I threatened to kill myself. My father wasn't too happy about all this. He held me by the throat, choking and dragging me around. I said, "I wish I was dead." At that moment I realized I had serious depression my whole life. Since then every day has been a day I want to live one less. It was high school, a new adventure, and where everything turned to shit. For the overview of fresh to senator year, I came out bisexual, became a minor alcoholic, falling in my father's footsteps, failed overdose on Xanax to commit suicide, had therapy, ditched school all the time, suspensions, smoked pot and cigarettes, and argued with the mother and father all the time. During these years my parents gave up on me. I had to walk everywhere. I lived in a small town, so it wasn't super crazy but it still was hard. I didn't have many friends as I have issues, and you can see them when you get to know me. Plus, not having a phone makes things much harder in this life, and talking to friends or making plans. Also to be noted, my family had some money too. So it was steak every night for dinner, in our big home. Money has never been an issue, but it was always an issue to get me anything. I watched my brother and sister get smothered in everything they wanted. I struggled with suicide every day. Suicidal thoughts are something that you don't ever want to deal with. I have them multiple times a day and I know I will kill myself one day. I have tried to kill myself 3 times to this day. One when I overdosed at 15, one when I took 2 boxes of cold medicine and drank a bottle of cold syrup with DXM-19, and third when I injected air into my arteries 20. People tell me I need to see a therapist and a psychologist but I have. I don't like it at all. I've also taken antidepressants and I feel wrong being on them. The whole idea of medicine is a turn off to me. I once was married to. It was a girl from high school. We dated for almost a year, moved to another state, got married, worked hours off, argued, and got divorced. I moved back. When I was married, I found out I have an arachnoid cyst in my brain. It hurts and I get headaches all the time. Doctors say it shouldn't be doing anything but it does. I can't afford surgery, and in some ways I wouldn't mind dying. So the part where I find myself to be an embarrassment, my family doesn't see these issues that are occurring in my life. And being where I'm at now, it's sad. People would say, I have no money, no car, can't pay rent, animals I can't feed, no food to eat. All I have done is borrowed money from people for the past 4 months as I cannot land a job or sell anything I do own, which is now nothing. And I try, is the unfortunate part. I know I'm a good employee as I have always worked hard. But depression is over the top all the time. I don't sleep much anymore. Maybe 3-4 hours at 6 in the morning. My life is in shambles, and I'm falling apart. I messed up in high school, now no one wants to save a sinking ship. I don't know how much time is left on my clock. I feel the day's coming to an end, and somehow I have to find a way to make this work. This is when suicide should be okay, but it never will, so I struggle every day and keep pushing. My whole life I pushed everyone away, because I want people to be okay with my death when it comes. An odd thought, right? That's how my marriage fell apart. Any person that I have ever loved I've just pushed away, because I feel as though I deserve this. But to my mother and father, they think I'm drugs, borrowing money to spend on drugs, and just a low life. They say they love me, but I can feel the words as cold as they are. The worst part is I'm just sad. So I just wanted to point this out to any parent that cannot forgive your child for mistakes they have made. People have mental issues that are outside of their control. You may not see it. You see their actions, their wrongdoing. If you give up when everyone else does, they will have nothing worth value in life. I have never hurt anyone in my life, but I don't blame those who do. I understand what it's like to be stuck in a body you have no control over and hate. It's a hard idea to wrap around, but some people can't control themselves. The brain is a thing we humans don't fully understand. How do you judge what you don't understand? My mom will never forgive me, and I will never forgive my mom. My mom was deep into drugs, crystal meth and painkillers. Married an abusive guy, had a kid with him. Horrifying guy. I would have to call an ambulance once a week. because he overdosed on drinking pain patches. I don't know what the drug is called. I have 3 siblings at that point. The youngest, child of the new husband, was being held down and getting her skin tweezed because my mom can see broken glass in her skin. She had tried to pick at all of us, but all the older siblings had escapes. My sister always playing soccer. I went to the library a block away, and my younger brother was best friends with the neighbor. After seeing her scabs, and my mother still persistent on getting the glass out, I called the police. After the police showed up, me and all my siblings were taken out of her custody. Me, my older sister, and younger brother went and moved in with our biological father. Just got out of prison for making meth. Yeah, my dad was faking Heisenberg, who had completely turned his life around. My youngest sister goes into the care of our grandparents. My mother can schedule visitation, but she doesn't want to see me, and she knows that she can't just see the other 2 and leave me behind. So she ignores all of us completely and skips town for 8 years. She just came back to town and expected to be welcome into my grandparents' home because they have 2 spare rooms, and my grandmother was always quick to forgive. My grandpa hates my mom though. Thank God I now live with my grandparents and she doesn't want to see me, or she would have gotten to move in with my sister and grandparents. And I hate the thought of my little sister growing to love her mother not knowing what was being done to her. Not parent, but daughter. I don't know if I would say I will never be forgiven, but I can say I changed my mom forever, and not for the good. I had a lot trouble with depression and all that goes with it in high school. Looking back, I put my mom through hell. I was cutting, binge drinking, overdosing on pills, and struggling with a severe eating disorder. Before I start, I should add that I have no memory of the night this began nor the 2 days following. One night after I blacked out at a party from drinking so much, my parents came and picked me up. They debated taking me to the hospital, but decided instead to monitor me and check on me every half hour. At about 8 AM, my mom went to check on me in my bedroom, but I wasn't there. Thinking I went on the computers, which were in the basement, she headed downstairs ready to punish me. When she went down into the basement, however, I wasn't on the computers. My basement is unfinished and shaped so that the staircase is in the middle and the room surrounds it, meaning if you do not walk all the way around the stairs, you cannot see what is on the other side of the basement. My mom was about to head back upstairs to look for me when she got what she describes as a very strange feeling that something was wrong. She decided to walk around to the other side of the basement, and that's when she found me. I had hung myself from the foundation beams of the ceiling. Again, I don't remember any of this. My mom let out a scream that only people who have seen their child in a state like this would know, which woke up every member of my family. I had clearly been hanging for some time because I was completely eggplant purple. I had lost control of my bladder, peed, my hands and feet were in a flexed/stiff state, and my eyes were blood red. My stepdad and mom managed to get me down, and my stepdad felt a faint pulse. My mom performed CPR on me until the paramedics showed up. My mom was told the state of my hands and feet were sign of brain damage. I was taken to the hospital, put on life support, and a chaplain was brought in to pray with my mom and say goodbye. But then something happened. I started getting better overnight. By morning, I was well enough to be transferred to different hospital, and by the next day I was conscious. As for the brain damage, I have somehow shown almost no signs whatsoever, physically or mentally. I'm thankful, as is my mom, to be alive and well today, but my mom will never be the same again after seeing me like that and watching me almost die. My son is currently 2.5 and honestly, nothing yet. No anger for the time I don't have anymore. No malice because my wife's libido dropped off almost entirely. Not a thing. And the best example of why it will take something pretty severe actually happened 2 days ago. He woke up at 12:30 AM and was covered in vomit, got sick in his bed, and didn't know what to do, so he basically pouted, so we would hear him on the monitor. After cleaning him up, changing his sheets, twice after he vomited upon being put back in bed, and settling on me staying with him until he fell asleep. I have a ton of sick time at work. I was sitting in the small reclining rocker in his room with him on my lap, and he just kind of looked at me with his sick but concerned face. I asked him if he was scared, and he said in a frail voice yeah. So I reassured him that I would be right there with him and that he would be okay. He finally fell asleep on a blanket on his floor, wrapped in his other blankets. About 2 hours later, 3 AM at this point, I stayed in the room, having dozed off as well, until 5 AM, at which point I put another blanket on him, since he had kicked off his primary covering. Now, the reason I say this is an example for me, is that my son, my child, doesn't know any better about some of the things that happen to him or because of him. That's what my wife and I are for, to help him understand, and hopefully aid him in becoming someone who will make decisions with which he can live. We don't do this because we feel obligated / are forced to. We do this because we love him. I get frustrated with him, and I know I will get angry with him as he gets older, but he is still my son and I will always love him. I fully expect him to make decisions that disappoint me, or that I won't support. He's not going to hear oh, it's okay with every single thing he does in life. But I will be there if he needs me. And while I can't comment on things that haven't happened yet, I still feel confident that there is unlikely to be something that he does that I cannot forgive. Because holding on to that kind of anger and resentment, and holding it against my child, seems much more stressful than being open with him about what I feel, but telling him that I still love him. I set our house on fire when I was 13. There was a lot of damage, mostly to the basement. My mom got it, somewhat, repaired and told me she was using the $100 that my great aunt gave me when I was born. So naturally, I took a can of spray paint and spray painted my name, in cursive, over the repairs. A few days later, I woke up to a big black guy with a baseball bat in my room. My brother yelled, "Just give him your money, and he won't hurt you." It turned out that this guy was an exterminator. Rats got into our home because of the fire damage. I recently said something about all of this on Facebook, and I learned that my mom is still really mad and has never forgiven me. FYI, the fire was an accident. I was smoking cigarettes. The spray paint, I have no idea. I was a good kid otherwise. The rats, my bad. Edit, I guess this story sounds like bullshit. I do have a photograph of me standing next to my bedroom wall, where I also spray painted my name for some dumb as reason. I don't have any photos of the fire damage or half-as repairs. Oh, and my brother was being funny when he said to give that guy my money. Exterminator found an old pillowcase of Halloween candy under my bed that the rats had been nibbling on. http://imga.com/scodewall. Interesting topic. A child's perspective. I was a troubled kid. Bad grades for a while in high school. Detention. Tantrums. Boring stuff. And in my 20s I became a full-blown alcoholic. Honestly, I was a burden on my parents up until my late 20s. They paid for my DUI lawyer. They paid for my rehab. So on and so forth. I have no remorse towards them. None. Zero. Fact them. Why? What caused my behavior? I was such a good kid until I hit 12. Then I'd lose interest in schoolwork, have episodes of acting out, and in my 20s I hit the bottle. From the age of 12 until about 16, I was sexually, physically, and emotionally abused by my brother. Sexually it wasn't he touched me stuff, it was the whole thing. Physically it wasn't he slapped me stuff, it was he pistol whipped me and threatened to blow my brains out stuff. Emotionally it wasn't he called me name stuff, it was he wore down my self-worth to the point where I attempted suicide twice. So 2010 I get drunk enough to talk to my parents about the abuse. Their response? Get over it. Move on. Now I'm disowned, and my brother is the sole owner of my family's business. Well-respected member of society, and I'm facing up to a month in jail for DUI/suspended license. Thankfully I've had quite a lot of therapy for PTSD, so I'm closer to normal than I've been in a long time. Not looking for sympathy, trust me, I've got that already in my personal life. It gets repetitive and boring after a while. Just, sometimes parents make bad decisions as well. Perspective can be distorted at times, like when you take the sexual abuser/sociopath side over the drunk survivors. I'm not a parent, but I'm a son and I think I can provide an answer. I'm lucky. I've a good relationship with my mother. I've a number of younger sisters and I've always done my best to be a good role model for them. I was a straight A student, I did fairly well in sports, and I never really got in serious trouble. A few detentions for talking in class, maybe I was tardy here or there, but nothing serious. I had that kind of relationship with her where my biggest fear was disappointing her, so I never really needed to be told what to do and what not to do. I lived at home my first few years of college, so I could continue to help my mother raise my sisters. The youngest one is 10 years younger than me, but the family understood I was going to not be around as much, that classes would, for the first time, be hard on me, and I'd have new friends that I'd want to hang out with. All the normal college stuff. A week or so goes by, and I'm heading off to my first college party. I'm 18. Legal drinking age in the US is 21, for anyone who didn't know. As I'm about to leave, my mom grabs me. Not in a violent way, just in a hey, pay attention way. Pass, you know I love you, and you know I trust you. You've always made good decisions, and when you've made mistakes you've owned up to them, and we've always gotten through them. Now, I'm not stupid. I know there will be alcohol at the party, and I know you'll be tempted to drink it. I understand if you do. It's college. And then my mother's face got more serious than I think I've ever seen it. But if you even attempt to drive home drunk, then you will no longer be my son. I didn't know how to react to that. I'd never been told anything like that in my life. But it was very clear that she was serious. So while I've never driven drunk, I know very much what the line would be of something that I could do that I'd never be forgiven for. God, this is a depressing thread. I don't have a story about something my child did that I cannot forgive him for. We have 2 boys. On the contrary, I want to share something heartwarming just because of the funk I've gone into after reading this thread. We have 2 boys. One is 3 years and another is 5 months old. I travel a lot for work, but usually it's a couple of days. The days that I'm away from my 3-year-old are easily the most difficult. I miss playing with him, giving him a bath, and reading him a story. This one time I had to go for 3 weeks for work. Before leaving I was a total wreck. I love my wife, but I was mortified at the thought of not seeing him. In drunken stupor that night I wrote him a series of letters for my wife to read to him. Turns out that my wife read him the letters every day. Sometimes he would ask for her to read them more than once. Every time she'd read them, he'd get shy and go quiet. And then he'd try to put 2 and 2 together and figure out that dad is not home and that it's a letter for him. And then one day we tried to FaceTime. All he could tell me was how he wanted me to come home. God, that was difficult and took all my strength to not tear up. I'm so sorry for all the parents that have had their babies turn out opposite of all expectations. Older brother here. This is going down right now. We'll update with the outcome. My 12-year-old sister didn't show up to school and has not answered any calls. I find out from her friend she said she was picking up a friend, then 30 minutes later a neighbor tells me she is walking home with an older looking boy. Police are on their way to my house, and I'm stuck in class and my mom has to drive an hour to get home. On a side note, what do I do if what I assume is actually happening? Setch, she knows plenty. Hell, I caught her plenty of time, master baiting. I'm fuming right now, and I'm ready to beat the shit out of the boy and her. I won't. I just am so damned pissed. I have no idea what to do, and I know my mom won't do shit about it. Update part 3. So, I just got home and sat down with her, having a serious chat. I'm happy to say it isn't as bad as thought. She admitted to me that yes, she did smoke every now and then. She drank once or twice. She is touchy on that. Though she is too uncomfortable to tell me why the boy she confirmed with me she was with him was here. I won't assume anything too far in the end, but I have a feeling maybe she is dating him. Meh, dunno. So, seems like everything turned out okay. I'm gonna keep chatting with my sister. It's really nice to have her open up to me. TLDR, thought my sister was becoming a delinquent, was happily proven wrong. When I was in 3rd grade, a friend and I had some day off school. I think it was for Labor Day. So being the little monsters we set on an adventure. There was this business park close to where I lived and this abandoned warehouse next to where we played Little League Baseball. Well, we were bored, so we started throwing rocks at the windows. Did it for an hour, and it was totes fun, but then got bored and left. The next day after school we were bored again, and decided to throw some more rocks. This time we brought some friends too, but they were just watching. We start sailing rocks through the windows, and having a great time and whatnot. After a few minutes though, one of the building garage doors open with about 5 big guys screaming at us. We panic and start running away, only to turn around into 2 cop cars just pulling up. Turns out the place wasn't abandoned, just shitty looking. We get arrested. Parents are called to bail us out. We are forced to pay for all the damage, even though the windows were completely faked, before we started the day before, which came out to be about $2,000 from each of us. I also had to do community service for 60 days. This was the first time I saw my dad cry, and that is something my parents could never forgive me for. That, and I'm a flaming homosexual. I know none of you may ever read this, and even if you do, it may just be another kind word in the noise of comments, but I'd like to believe someone reads it and it helps. Plus, after reading just a handful of these posts, I want to believe it can help someone. Once heard a really good metaphor for parents who have children, that they've done everything they possibly can to help, and still turn out terrible. When your child is born, it was placed at the center of a large open field. You knew what was coming. What terror was on the way. A devastating enemy known as life. To help your child, you built a house surrounded by a fence, in order to help defend him/her. You gave that child every weapon possible. A knife, rifle, shotgun, rocket launcher, machine gun, flamethrower, etc. now belonged to this child. Dusk came to and the horde of zombies known as life approached. You've given your child every possible avenue to victory and survival. The decision on which weapon he/she chooses is completely up to them. They are responsible for their weapon of choice. Some play it safe and use rockets from a distance while setting up turrets on blind spots. Others play a little more daringly and go for the shotgun. Those who chose the knife solely are playing life on hard mode. You've done your best to help them succeed, but ultimately they are responsible for whether or not the zombies get into the house and kill them, not you. You fought and are still fighting your own hordes. I know breaking things down into metaphors helps some people. I hope at least one person sees this and is comforted. My story, but not exactly about me, as it involves lots of other people. Not about my children, but kind of a reverse view from what I've seen other people post about their kids turning out to have a dark side. So 20 years ago, nearly 21, my birth dad left my mother the day I was born. I had spent the last 19 years looking for him while he evaded paying childcare bills. Little did I know he had been raising another family with 2 other women. My mother darted around at clubs etc. point up until the age of 4 looking for a decent man. She would often go without food and we lived in an ex-brothel which the council owned and was falling apart. It's a surprise I'm still alive as we had no heating and hardly had any electricity. My mother's dad was away a lot and didn't see my mum all too much. My mum didn't know her mum until 2 years ago. However, she died due to alcohol poisoning about half a year ago. At the age of 4 my mother met my stepdad, a wealthy guy who has always been stable on money, multiple businesses but very stern. Let's skip forward to the age of 12. This is what I would class as my worst time in my life. I was in and out of love, that stage of my life, and had little support from my family. I was struggling at school as my favorite subjects would be with teachers I hate. I'll get to that soon. I was often bullied for not having very nice clothes, ripped shirts, trousers, and blazer. I would usually hang around with people in the year above as they looked after me as best as they could. Every day I would go home, usually didn't want to as I would retreat to my room and stay out the way of my family. At the ripe old age of 14 I got grounded for a year. Why? Well, it's because I told my mother to stay out of my life after she saw a bruise I got from a school fight. She wasn't interested before, so why should she be then? A whole year I was grounded for being the victim at school. Skip on past the rebellious stages. I'm 16. Get with a girl called Cyan. She's everything I thought I wanted. I had previously been in a relationship with her friend Kari's, but that didn't work out when she told me she had an abortion at the age of 12 and still loved her ex. So I'm with Cyan and 9 months pass. Not sure what's going on, but my relationship with my parents is getting worse, being kicked out 4 nights at a time as I kept running away for constantly being grounded, and Cyan was there to look after me. Until she wanted a break. I, being full supportive, said okay. We stopped talking for 2 weeks. I found a girl during this time and we clicked. I was torn between my ex and my new girlfriend. I had no one to talk to about this, and the new girl was a social outcast. Just like me. I told Cyan I didn't want to be on a break. She said she wanted more time. I suspected she was cheating on me, so I kept an eye on her. Bam, she was. It was over, and I asked the newer girl, Melissa, out on a date. She said yes. Myself and Melissa are going really strong. Over 4 years and she's been my rock. We've been on holiday and she's been here to support me during my hardest times. Skip a few years, myself and Melissa have been doing great. We are close, happy and enjoying the summer holidays. I'm out, ignoring my parents, and working at MacCD. I'm 18 at this time, or 19. Can't remember the exact times I worked there. I hated it though. I got into a deep depression about 2 months in. Members of the staff there constantly stole money out of my till, and I was constantly having that money taken out my wages. No way I could prove it though with the managers involved. Not to mention I had a moped I paid for breaking down every week and school fees to pay. I decided to look for a new job. I found KFC as my next best thing. Bam, I got the job. I was happy I could leave. MacCD wrote my leaving notice. It said, I'm leaving. Got told I needed to leave a reason, your cunts. Melissa and I went out for dinner to celebrate. A new chapter of my life begins. My mum and stepdad have been pretty distant at this point in time. I feel like I've grown up all on my own. I'm just getting on with it and trying not to let everything get to me. My best friend at the time who helped convince me to leave Cyan actually ends up getting with her. Our friendship has died since then. Time passes, getting on with life, doing amazing at school, film studies and media studies. However, my ed teacher is constantly losing my A-level work, putting me down, and says that I will never get my dream job in it. Again, I'll speak about that in a minute. I decided to man up and talk to my parents. Melissa said I should try and I thought, what the heck, what can I lose? I tried and they demanded a meeting with the school. What's this? I'm getting some support. Well, the answer would be no. When my film and media studies teacher praised the hell out of me, they didn't care one bit. The moment my ed teacher says I'm stupid and don't understand the core components of how to do the ed course work, I get shouted, and my stepdad threatens to kick me out of school to work at KFC for the rest of my life. Can I just state, my Ike teachers failed me on a HTML course. I had been playing with PHP and HTML on my lunch breaks, making little projects and having a blast. I got told I failed because I tried to use front page instead of Word. Logical? No. My birth dad sends me a letter. All this time trying to contact him, and I get a letter. He doesn't want anything to do with me. He says some very explicit stuff, calls me a mistake and a burden. I reply with, you're just a sperm donor. My parents buy me a car for my birthday. Here's your new car. You have to pay us back. Then I pay them for car insurance. They don't pay the car insurance people and don't give my money back. £400 wasted. I get kicked out. The good news, I'm now 20 years old and still with Melissa. I have my own flat after being kicked out and I work as its support. Yay. Take that education system for an education center. I recently got promoted for my outstanding work and my car insurance is finally paid off. All in all, things are finally looking up, and mostly without the support of parents. Story of a guy who wanted a normal family. TLDR, family is faked up. Live unknown. Happy. I'm not saying my father can't forgive me, but I do feel he holds a very big grudge for me not achieving my full potential, and here's why. I don't mean to be so arrogant, but I was damn good at soccer and I could have been great. I grew up in a home of athletes and soccer just happened to be my thing. My grandfather was a great soccer player that we hear amazing stories about, and my dad was a football player that got scholarships to play in college. But anyways, I grew up with only my father and he did all he could to keep us afloat. He was the type of man that always told us that if we wanted to achieve something, it was possible with hard work. Well, playing soccer ain't cheap here in the USA. I mean, team fees and cleats, the whole thing is so expensive, and he felt that I deserved the best cleats and the best teams, so he worked his ass off to get me these things while paying for a home himself and taking care of my 3 other siblings by himself. As I grew up I got better and better, and then around the age of 17 my life fell apart as I fell into deep depression and gave up on everything in life and just lived like an empty shell. I quit progressing at soccer and just threw it away like it was nothing. I still play to this day with my dad as well, which is my favorite thing in the world because I do love soccer more than anything, but still from time to time I hear him tell me about how great I should have been and how much potential I have. I'm only 21, but damn does it hurt to see/hear my dad tell me about how great I should have been. I mean, this man never missed a game or practice while working so hard for me, and to see how I did him like this, it's a shame. I'm grateful to have had a dad, and I hope he holds no grudge towards me for being so selfish. Not a parent, but my mother and I do not get along. Our relationship deteriorated when I was in high school, and I'm 31 now, and it's pretty much dead at this point. My crime? When I was in HS I was a compulsive liar to my parents about my grades. If I got a bad grade I lied about it because my mom or dad would hit or beat me. Then in college I liked going out and drinking. I never did drugs, slept around or got into trouble with the law. I just liked partying like any normal college kid does. I had good grades and a job. But because I went out she looked down on me. I moved out when I was 23 and to another state to work. Everything was going well until I turned 28, and then my professional life became a mess. I've gotten laid off from various jobs. I work in advertising, which was one of the most affected industries in the recession. Even though I have had incredible performance reviews and still maintain contact with many previous employers and clients, I haven't been able to hold a job for more than a year due to budget cuts/companies going under/being the last one hired, so the first one laid off. My parents take this as a sign that I'm a bad employee. It doesn't matter to them that I have great recommendation letters and references. I have over 18 recommendations on my LinkedIn alone. It's just been very tough and obviously has taken a toll on me emotionally. I just finished my master's a month ago, and I'm working on new projects and hoping things in 2014 turn around. Still, my parents regard me a failure and tell my younger sisters to not end up like me. It breaks my heart. My friends who have known me all my life tell me that I have changed so much and the fire in my eyes has gone out, and they are right. I feel like an utter failure and my mother never ever lets me forget it. This isn't something that they've never forgiven me for. I was forgiven, but it's something my mom will probably never forget. My mother and father were/are having a difficult time. My father was an abusive alcoholic and a hoarder of money. He'd rather hide $50,000 in his pillow than put it in the bank, because if my mom ever split from him, he'd have to give her half. He's stingy and really a horrible person. I've ceased communication as best as I can for now. Anyways, to the story. My mom and I noticed that my father was in the basement often, which he normally wasn't. We'd investigate every now and then but wouldn't find anything. Until one day, we noticed the ceiling tiles in our drop ceiling were moved. We checked, and sure enough he had a stash of money up there. My mom took half as she felt she was entitled to it. She'd have to beg for money at Christmas just to get my sister and I something as she quit her job to be a stay-at-home mom on his orders. Being the stupid kid I was, I took $3,000 from the stash without them knowing. The stupid kid I was also 15. So as you can imagine, it definitely went through intelligent purchases, junk food, garbage, etc. and a ring for my ex, which, being 15, didn't last. One day I felt so horrible about it, I asked my sister to get my mom. I confess, without her finding out prior. She was so furious with me, and the trust factor was gone for who knows how long. I immediately got a job and started paying back what I took. Took a while, being minimum wage and all, but I did pay it back. My mom has since regained her trust for me, but to this day I know she'll never forget I did that. Had I not confessed and paid it back, I know my mom probably wouldn't have forgiven me either. My beloved wife, the only thing anchoring me to compassion and empathy for others, the master of my life, died in childbirth, giving birth to my second son, my third child. Initially I had hoped that I might love my new child as I had loved her, until I saw him. The reason she died was because of this child's hideous deformities, most especially his overlarge head. I sunk into a depression, and I realized that all I had left was my money, my precious money. My boss was a total cunt, and my children had little enough love for me. They loved each other too much to pay any real attention to their distant dad who spent almost all of his time serving in high-ranking government positions and gathering huge sums of wealth. It was only made worse when my only real son, the deformed one didn't count in my mind, was named to the personal guard of my cunt boss, forbidding him from having children or inheriting his birthright. Things got better when I helped bring my cunt boss low in vengeance and married my daughter to his replacement. However, my deformed son, called the Imp, had grown into a troubling adulthood, embarrassing my family's honorable name by whoring, drinking, and conniving his way into positions of power he scarce deserved. Again, all I had, now that attached me to the world, was my name, my wealth, and my power. When the war came, I suddenly found I had to work with my imp son. When my real son was captured by the enemy, then he had the nerve to demand that he was the rightful heir to the family wealth and lands. What a jerk, what a fool. He, the second, deformed son, who drank and hoed away more than his share of our wealth, never. My parents don't have Reddit, so I will write this for them. This story will be short, so if you want a longer version then tell me. I'm an average Joe up until 7th grade. A couple kids tell me to follow them, so I did. Stupidly, our destination was a lone joint sitting on a rock in a swampy ravine. They tell me to smoke it and I do. So begins the druggy phase. My parents find out I'm a stoner by the end of the week and yell at me. I coerce them with big words to allow me to smoke sometimes, and so they allow it. Fast forward a couple years, until I'm in high school. I smoke every day, and I'm only 15. I even sold it a couple times. Only twice because nobody else would buy from the freshmans. I'm loving it, my parents aren't. But my big words persuaded them to allow it. Mostly my mom. My dad doesn't live with me. Fast forward a year, I don't go to school anymore and the only things I do are sitting in my room and smoking. I rarely talk to my dad and all I do is play video games. My mother is depressed and we argue every day. Sometimes I say shit I'd say when I was 10, such as rod or fuck you beach. But usually it's me ignoring her and breaking stuff in my room. The only thing that keeps me calm is video games, and the only people I talk to are gaming friends on Skype. The only reason I allow myself to continue is because I'm killing myself whenever I get my hands on a gun. I'm a child and youth care counselor and I've heard a lot. I see parents struggle to help/reach their children who have raped and molested siblings and others, assaulted people, burned down family homes. It is really heartbreaking. These parents get yelled at, hit, bit, spit at, rejected. Sometimes I think it's best for the parents to cut ties or disengage to a degree. It was not their fault and they cannot control what their children do. Some individuals do have darkness, and it's really heartbreaking when you can't help them/reach them, and I hate to say it, but some people do not want help. While you can always offer resources and support in case that changes, it's the old lead a horse to water, but can't make them drink. I was severely abused by my parents. Every type imaginable, but I choose to believe in better things, hence becoming a counselor. But some days I just sit in silence wondering what I'm battling. Flip side, one thing I will never forgive my mother for was, when I was 10 I needed braces. My mom had benefits, but refused to use them to help me, because she would be damned if she would pay for me being born defective? Yup, that's why I now have a diploma in counseling and my BSW. Thank you for the inspiration, lady. Kudos to all the hardworking parents out there. You guys are amazing, and I respect you and appreciate you so much. Yes, traumatic bonding may always tie you to your children, but I hope you can find acceptance and peace. I'm not the parent here, but mom recently asked me if I think my brother has something wrong with him. Keep in mind he's 14, so puberty could explain minor mood swings, and I don't think it covers some of his statements. My mom has been dealing with severe nerve pain for a while, and recently incredible lower back pain from work. She also just hit menopause, so that isn't helping either. Anyways, after my dad had to leave town for a week for work, my grandmother, dad's mom, stayed with us. She slept in my brother's room for one night before she left, and proceeded to message myself and my mother, "I wish grandma would just faking die. I hate her so much. I get annoyed with a 70-year-old Bible thumper too, but she's family, and I appreciate her affection for me and my brother." So, that's where my mom gets worried. Shortly after my brother spent the night at my mom's house, divorced parents, and while my mom was having back pains, my brother demanded he be drove back to our house, cause he was bored, because who knew that smoking pot and playing Xbox wasn't infinitely entertaining? My mom stated she couldn't due to the pain, and my brother responded to her, "Do I look like I faking care?" This story is an account from my stepfather who say that all happened, and my mom just broke down right there. She told me that she doesn't know if she can forgive him, and to be completely honest, neither am I, and I'm pretty sure he needs counseling or something. Edit. My mother has been incredibly lenient with my brother, and he's been habitually disrespectful of her, and he always laughs it off when confronted. He never questions our dad, and never says any kind of shit like that to him. So, yeah. I'm not a parent, but I figure it might count. When I was 1 month old, my father had hit my mom, and she left him. He put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger to find the gun empty. He hit her again. AMD. She called the cops. She hid me in a closet until he was taken away. He went through treatment and bullshitted his way through it. He comes back, and the therapy ended up doing pretty good for him. I was just a little guy, almost 2 or 3, when my mom let me go stay with him every other week. He lived at my grandma's house, now passed away. God bless her, and we had lots of fun together. We would go to movies, play on his PlayStation 1 and his computer. It was fun. When I was 4 and going into kindergarten, my father left unannounced. He left me and went into the army. AMD didn't come home until I was 8 or 9. He wrote me and came home on leave. He was still the dad I knew. Then, when he came home for good, he wasn't the same. He was cruel and paranoid. He thought, and thinks, that the enemy is still here. He used to believe he was in the army. After he came home, he had married and had 2 other kids, my favorite little guys. We moved from my grandma's to my grandma's, also passed away, God bless her. We lived there, and he got a job as a truck driver, and then a job at Home Depot, so he didn't have to leave home. After he got enough money, we moved. Once we were in per new house, things changed. He used to beat me and ground me. I wouldn't be able to do anything because his decline after the army happened in less than a year. It wasn't until I was about 12 to 13 that I started to fight back. I easily could have beat him. I was about his size. I'm tall and have broad shoulders. Runs in my family. My stepmother would call the cops and I'd get in trouble, even though the bruises came through. My dad claimed it was him pushing me off him. The beatings didn't stop until I was 14 and started to literally go insane from him beating me almost every day. I was gone for 10 months and came home. I didn't have to go to my dad's because my mom believed me about the beatings. I went and visited my dad after a few months being home, and he had put on a lot of weight. I've had to visit him in the hospital a few times because with his weight it was hard for him to breathe. I'm still very scared of him. I love him. He's my dad. But I'll never forgive him. I can't. I think he beats my brothers. I don't go to his house too often, but when I do they seem scared of him. I've asked them, and obviously they say no. No bruises, and the cops looked into it. I take them out to a movie at least once a month. This is about an uncle I've been thinking a lot about lately. My father grew up in a traditional Irish Catholic family of 5 kids. My uncle, aunt, then my dad, another aunt, then the uncle in question. I'm not sure of all the specifics because I was not born yet and my family never speaks about it, but my uncle sexual molested his oldest brother's daughter. I believe she was an adolescent at the time. My uncle was married at the time, and he and his wife moved several states away. I'm told that I have 2 cousins my age, whom I have never met. I have also never met my uncle or his wife. I have only ever seen them in old family videos. No one in my dad's family ever speaks to him or his family, and I was only told within the past year why I've never met him. I was always told that it was over a matter that arose after the passing of my grandfather, but I know now why it was hidden from me. My family clearly doesn't want to talk about it, and I don't blame them, but I can't help feeling like I want to meet them. The rest of the family is so beautifully happy and loving. I'm not sure why all this happened in the first place. Yesterday I googled his name, our last name is uncommon, and found his address, phone number, etc. I have the urge to at least call him, but I don't think my parents would be happy with me if they found out. If my grandfather or grandmother were alive at the time, I'm not sure how they would react. I unfortunately never met them either, but I have a feeling they'd have the same reaction/feelings that the rest of my uncle's siblings did. Sorry if this is random/poorly thought out. I've just been thinking a lot about it and don't have anyone to talk to about it. Not a parent, but I want to give a story about my aunt. She's 43, been a drug addict since before I was born, started in her teens. She's only ever married other addicts. She doesn't call unless she needs money, or she's so faked up on pills or withdrawing so hard that she wants my 70-year-old grandfather to drive his broke down truck on a 4-hour round trip to come pick her up. She asked him for $1,000 a few years ago, claiming it was for bills. Got home and ordered $1,000 worth of drugs on some website. Blamed her husband for it. Right. She ended up moving down here for a while and drove drunk all the time. Told my little sisters our mom used abortion as a form of birth control. Accused my grandfather of molesting her as a child when he wouldn't give her money to go get drugs with her. Stole my grandfather's pain pills every time he got a refill. We often watched him struggle to walk and do anything while she was high as a kite. Accused me of being a selfish bitch when I wouldn't give her my pain medication I got for having weight surgery. She constantly stayed high on nerve pills, and none of us visited our grandparents or could come in the house because anytime any of us got money from our grandparents, she went ballistic. My grandfather stayed in debt when she was here. She stole all of my grandmother's methadone once and could care less that my papa had to drive to town every single day for her methadone maintenance. She did nothing but she'd talk my mom, my grandmother, my family. She isolated my grandmother and constantly told her that papa was only with her because they had kids. She would write stories where everyone was dead and she was the only one who could console my grandfather. I stopped loving her a while back. I feel nothing when she tells me she loves me. I could be talking to a total stranger. She had a miscarriage because she was doing crank, and she screamed how much she hated my grandmother and blamed her miscarriage happening on her. When she calls sober or on drugs she's happy on, she compares herself to my sister, who has her life together, doesn't do drugs and is independent. It's like comparing an alligator and a better fish. I don't think I will ever forgive her for the tons of other things she's done, and I doubt she cares. I can honestly say I don't think I will be sad when she dies. I'm pretty late to the game, but here goes. This isn't nearly as bad as other people's stories, more of a loss of trust. I was in about 4th or 5th grade, and I was home with my grandma, who wasn't really all there mentally, just kind of someone who could basically be in the house if my folks had to go out for a bit. She has Alzheimer's and just kind of sat around with her thoughts. I had a bad habit of getting very distracted quite easily. Chalk it up to AD. Yes, I was actually diagnosed, not just assumed. I wanted some oatmeal, so I put the kettle on for hot water and poured it in my food. Then I did something that only makes sense in a kid's brain. I purposely turned the burner back on under the kettle to see how hot it would get and see how loud the kettle could whistle. I then putzed about the kitchen waiting for the kettle to heat up. It was taking a long time, so I ran upstairs to my room to grab something, and, surprise surprise, I got distracted by a book and ended up laying on my bed reading for a good 15 minutes. That's about the time that I heard the smoke alarm go off. I ran to the top of the stairs and couldn't see down them because there was a layer of smoke filling the first floor. I sprinted into the kitchen, and I could barely see through the smoke, but there were clearly flames flickering through the haze. I ran toward it to see the kettle melting onto the stove and the whole thing was on fire. I turned off the burner and filled a big cup of water and started throwing it on the kettle, putting it out. I then ran around the house looking for my grandma, who I found just sitting in the smoke-filled living room just looking around none the wiser. I grabbed her arm and led her outside, then opened the windows to try to air out the house. The damage ended up being contained to a relatively small area of the kitchen, but my parents freaked out when I called them and explained what happened. I said I thought I turned the burner all the way off. I was way too scared to admit it was intentionally left on. They replaced a portion of the stove and that was that. It wasn't until years later, my mom admitted that they never bought another kettle because of that incident, and they never trusted me alone in the kitchen alone. I'm 27 and to this day, my mom still acts nervous when I visit and cook things for them. I don't think she ever really got over that event. This is not my personal experience. This is the tale of my grandma and her son, Bubba, and my two aunts, Lion and Rabbit. So when my good old grandpappy passed away he left his old house to my uncle Bubba on the condition that he be letting my grandma stay there till the end of her days. Now, fast forward about 20 years or so, my mama found out he was abusing the hunting lease and therefore his power of attorney. So my granny goes on down to the courthouse and takes him off the power of attorney and splits it 3 ways between mama and 2 aunts, of which one is Rabbit. So Uncle Bubba gets angry and decides to evict my granny. Now you'll know, we are saying what intonations are you doing, Bubba? So granny went on down to the courthouse and took that as straight off the will. Hehe. So fast forward another 3 years or so. Granny is getting older now, so Lion and Rabbit decide to do a couple really stupid things. First, they receive a letter from the doctor she might be coming on down with a case of the dementias. So anyways, these fucking geniuses decide to send off the letter to the goddamn banksters. And you'll know how the banksters be. They locked up the goddamn account. Second thing they did that was real stupid, more racist than stupid really, was they installed this nanny cam in the house. Fact that is. Anyway. Well, on this here nanny cam they see the old Negro family friend give granny a hug. Keep in mind this here fella been cutting granny's lawn for the past 20 odd years, tacking her to the store to buy her groceries, and checking in on her every now and then. So these geniuses, Lion and Rabbit, decide they gon' get him fair trespassing on the family plot. They calls up the deputy and say that he was molesting my granny. Now, this here is the goddamn South, so if there really was a Negro molesting my granny we'd get that son beach quicker and you can count to 3, I tell ya. So they was just being bigoted and whatnot, real stupid too. They ain't excommunicated yet though, they's just bout to be. They get one more goddamn fuck up. Anyways, thanks for listening. I got her under the stove to get me some more of that Jim BTLDR. Grandmother was evicted by her own son, almost conned out of her money by 2 of her daughters, and they attempted to throw her black friend in jail for hugging her by saying it was molestation. Not a parent, but a brother. Eldest son in my family, and my younger brother at an even younger brother of mine and a sister. I think he might have also tortured the pets a bit, but that kind of pales in comparison. I was in the shower when my parents found out about it, and they took me outside and asked me if I knew anything about. Didn't have a fucking clue, of course. Felt like I'd been hit with a rock. Rapist brother was immediately taken to a friend's house without kids, and we called the counselor he had been going to the next day for advice on what to do. Seriously, what the hell do you do in this situation? Counselor had no immediate advice for our family, but called back a few hours later to notify us that she had contacted child services and that we had 1 to 6 hours to prepare for an inspection which could determine whether or not the rest of us were taken away from our parents and put into foster care. Fortunately my parents moved heaven and earth and managed to keep us all, while rapist brother went to juvenile detention. This all happened about 3 months before I left for college, and I've been quietly dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts for 3 years now out of guilt for leaving my family in that condition. Haven't mentioned it to my family, they have more than enough shit to deal with as it is without me adding to the pile. But to top it off, the little sheet is coming home from his treatment program in January or so, and I have no idea how to feel about that. My wife has a twin sister who is married to the same sex. She lives in Ohio, and well, obviously as lesbians there is no traditional method to conceive a child or really even to adopt. Anyhow, they decide that they are going to watch over these two young boys who are 4 and 3. However, I don't know the story about how they came across these boys. The parents of these children share the same house and are total sheet. I mean worse sheet than a Jesse Pinkman was going to waste in Breaking Bad. Typically, it's a delight for the kids to spend time with my sister-in-laws and my wife, and I enjoy being around them and consider them nephews. Fast forward through a bunch of shit and the state decides that the parents are unfit, and seeing as these ladies have been taking care of them, gives them temp custody. Parents are required to work and acquire better living situations. If not, after a year, they get full custody/adoptive rights to the child. Huge news for everyone. Those parents completely take the welfare and unemployment checks and nothing goes towards the kids. So where is the something that your child has done you can never forgive them for? According to the oldest child's parents, it's getting a faking job. They have channeled all their hatred and angst through all this towards their innocent son, whose crime is needing to be taken care of. Youngest child's parents are also focused in on their son and their reasoning for being born. I have never thought it fathomable to have such a direct and sheet approach to your children. There is not a time in my life where I have been so angry that my vision goes blurry and that I can feel my heartbeat in my face. I remember going with my sisters to the kids' parents' house to pick up their belongings, and it was just a disaster. I think the children who suffered in Katrina were better off. Where are the parents? Sitting on the couch drinking and doing drugs. The oldest child's father had the nerve to stand up and tell us to make sure we took it all and that he never wanted us to come back. Enter age mode. In the second half of my life I have never gotten into a physical altercation about anything. Until then, I beat the living shit out of that guy and I never felt any remorse or pity for him or any of the others. I don't even feel a measure of justice dealt. TLDR, lesbians saved 2 children. Diff parents from shithole. Parents blame kids for their lack of money, jobs, motivation, and drug habits for simply being kids. I love my son dearly, but he did something this year that I don't think I will ever forgive him for. As hard as that is for me to believe, my wife died several years ago, and that was really hard for him, and he really hasn't been the same since. That's given me a lot of extra compassion and patience with him, but this was too much. I recently got remarried, and my second wife is really an incredible person. She's everything I want in a woman, and she makes me so happy. We are both a little bit older and quite successful, so honestly I didn't think I could find someone like her, especially at this age. Anyways, she has 2 children from a previous marriage, one of which is independent and has a lovely family, but the other is a bit of a loner and seems to be struggling to cope with his life, much like my son. Anyways, the 2 of them shot a music video the other day and crashed my boat, and then they threw me down the stairs while sleepwalking, and one of them got Hulk hands for Christmas and buried the other alive when they found out Nancy and I are getting divorced. Also, the neighbor has a service dog that is incredibly poorly behaved, and that's really terrible, but not necessarily applicable to this message. Anyways, I don't think I will ever be able to forgive my son and ex-stepson, since they took away my boat, retirement, and the woman that I love. I have agreed to accompany my son to an event at his work in a few weeks though, and it's at Catalina Island for the annual wine mixer, and I think it will be good to see him again and maybe see if we can make amends. Not a parent, but this is happening to my uncle and cousin. My cousin, we'll call her M, had a kid at 18, no biggie. She seemed to get a life on track after that. Then she married this cool guy who was in the military and had 2 kids with him. Everything seemed great, but the guy ended up with a drug problem because he probably has PTSD after fighting in Iraq. He wouldn't seek treatment and started abusing everyone. M didn't leave for a while. My uncle was super pissed because it's his only daughter and grandkids and offered her a home and she refused. But then after M and the husband divorced, she left. Literally just disappeared. No one knows where she is. She called her dad, my uncle, after a month of being gone, said she was happy somewhere else, asked them to look after the kids. The last I heard, she may be in Iowa, was in South Carolina. Whenever my family calls, we are in New York, we ask my uncle how everything is, and if he has heard from him he always responds who? And we say your daughter, and he responds I don't have a daughter, it has been about 2 years. I have no idea where my cousin is, there is no online activity and her kids are in the father's custody, not my uncle's where they should be, because I don't think they are safe. Last I heard, about 3 months ago, Em was talking to her mother, aunt, and uncle still together, because she had female problems, no idea what that means, but my uncle hates her. Sigh, this kid. So, my family was having troubles with this really rich family and my son, who was only freaking 14 at the time, decided the only thing to do was to get into a fight with them. They framed his father for some BS crime, but still, he overreacted and the ramifications of it are still felt by me today, 13 years later. So they framed his father and got him thrown in jail, but not until after an unruly brawl that left him with a broken leg. Keep in mind he's about 500 miles away at the time, so we can't just up and see them, so he gets a few of his friends and convinces them to come along, and he heads down there without telling me. I caught up to him later, but he got into a fight with some friends of this family and got himself shot through the arm. While he was healing, he ended up knocking up the nurse and faking married her, which was even worse because he was in an arranged marriage and I just didn't like dealing with that old asshole. Anyways, he's gotten into a few fights thus far and has won them all with his friends with few injuries, but then he has this stupid idea to go and apologize to that old fatched for knocking up and marrying some random person instead of marrying into his rich family. I try to keep him from going there, but he's too stubborn. We've been on the road for like 2 years now. I'm tired, everyone's tired, but he just presses on. We had plenty of internal strife as well. He had to behead a friend of his, but that's not important. So anyways we arrived at the freeze, and they shot him full of crossbow bolts and stabbed, killed a few of his friends and slit my throat. I'll never forgive him for it. I know that this post is old, but I had to create an account to reply to this thread. When I was younger, between about 3 years old to 12 years old, I used to have night terrors. The worst being, when I was younger, my mom has said I would look her dead in the face and tell her she was not my mother. Also many times I would speak in what my mom believes to be German. Not sure since I don't remember any of this and presently do not speak German. And as a side note, didn't have many strange things happen over the years after that. But I was deployed to Iraq in 2005 and came back just before 2006. I remember very little of what I'm about to say also. It was still winter around February or March and snow on the ground and freezing outside. I had a basement room and a walkout. My younger sister also was living there at the time. It was late at night, and I was laying on the bed watching television. And the next thing I remember, I was outside of my room trying to open the one window in the room trying to get back inside. I had no idea how I had gotten out there, and was freezing as I was only in boxer shorts. I tried the basement door, which was locked, and then ran to the front of the house. Since the garage is electric, and I apparently did not come outside through there, it was also closed. I went to the front door, which was also locked, and started beating on the door. My sister opened it and let me in with a prompt, "What the hell are you doing outside?" All I remember replying with was "I don't know," and walked back down and went to sleep. Now the strange part, I know what can be stranger, is that I did not remember any of this for about 4 years until my sister brought up at a New Year's Eve party. I totally blacked it out of my mind. I have no idea how I got outside or why I was outside. And all I really remember is I must get back inside as quickly as possible. Hopefully this adds to people's sleepless nights while reading this thread. I contemplated joining this thread all day, so here goes. I was that cheaty son. About 8 years ago my parents gave me my own personal computer in my room. At the time I was playing Counter-Strike as well as a whole bunch of other online MMOs. At school I wasn't very popular, but did very well anyways. Sat in the front row, listened intently to whatever the teacher said, did my homework, and aced all of the exams. Outside of school was what I was more interested in. I spent the time that I wasn't gaming on discussion boards. I was on 4chan very early on, and a bunch of other discussion boards that have either shut down or moved on. I read as much as I could, and learned a crap ton for being only 13. I read somewhere about how to make a keylogger, and I eventually did. I learned about programming, networking and it. While surfing and perusing, I found a big box retailer in my country had left a pretty gaping security hole in their online sales system. So with this security hole I managed to swipe credit cards from their database. I would make purchases online to addresses that weren't mine, and I eventually coaxed a bunch of my peers from my school to pick up the item I purchased, and I would pay them back in either or cash or iPods. All was going well until one of my peers got greedy. He wanted in on it, so I let him. First thing he does is order something to his house, and that's where everything comes crashing down on me. A week later the school constable shows up to my woodworking class saying he wants to talk to me. I'm none the wiser that I had been caught. He pulls me into a room and I ended up confessing to everything. I was only 13 at the time and seriously thought my life was over. Of course the police talk to my parents and they're astounded. Instantly I was grounded indefinitely. No more personal computer for me, and the only electronic device I was allowed from then on was an iPod. I was homeschooled for a period of time and eventually transferred schools once the word got out about what I had done. I get a lawyer while I'm being taken to criminal court. I was facing 2 years in prison for what I had done. Through my lawyer I get into a youth rehabilitation program. I was lucky, since it was a non-violent crime. I had to admit guilt to the crime and promise I wouldn't make any more trouble to get put into this program. It was 6 months of going to workshops and counseling, and in the end I had to write an essay about why what I had done was bad. On top of that I had to do 100 hours of community service, and if I was ever caught of a crime, then I'd have the book thrown at me. As soon as I turned 19 all of the crimes were wiped clean off of my record. Seeing the stress that put on my parents was astounding. They always were pissed off at me after that. I recall one time at a store I was with them in line at the cash register and my mom snapped at me saying, "Look at this name. This is how you pay for things." Granted, I do accept how they feel towards me after that. A few years down the road I go off to university. I'm in the top of my honors program and am looking at going to grad school. I don't know what the takeaway message from this is, but I surely learned my lesson. I haven't had any run-ins with the law since, and I don't even think about speeding or driving without a seatbelt. TLDR, I had a PC when I was really young, learned how to steal credit card information, got caught, parents pissed. My adopted son murdered our infant daughter. He isn't with us anymore either, but first a little backstory. About 12 years ago we adopted a baby boy because my wife had fertility problems and the doctors told us she would not be able to have children. He was given up by his biological parents because they had drug problems. We raised him as he was our own, and he had a childhood most children born to such circumstances never get to see. He never showed signs of violent behavior, but he did throw fits from time to time that looking back now were a bit over the top. He once tore all the pages out of our family Bible when we told him that masturbation was against God's will and he would go to hell for it. An hour later we found him with his pants down and gold-lined parchment paper all over the room. He pissed and sheet all over the book binding. The look in his eyes was frightening. Other than a few minor incidents he was a relatively good child until we got the news that some new breakthroughs in fertility science might work for scenarios like my wife had. We told him we going to try to get him a new brother/sister and his response could not have been worse. He immediately said he didn't want a little sister and that he would run away if we did this to him. Then he started making threats about cheating in the baby's crib. I don't know what was wrong with this kid, but he really liked cheating on things. Anyway, he suffocated the baby with a dirty diaper and tried to blame it on the cat. My wife was so distraught that we sold him to the South American sex trade and are now living the good life in our underwater base under the ocean. Also, my wife is hotter than Jessica Alba and I invented the television. I don't know if I'm too late to the game, but here goes. My son, now 18, is the youngest of 3. One older brother and one older sister. He was a bit shadowed. Older siblings both being athletic and intelligent, they received the rewards of their actions before he did. I knew from the time he was a toddler that something about him was different. When he entered school, he was very fidgety, would act out, and wouldn't pay attention. We started giving him coffee twice a day at age 6, because the caffeine seemed to counteract his behavior and calm him down. He was diagnosed with ADHD and bipolar disorder at the age of 8, and his school placement in a DI, emotional impairment, school, and medication helped for a while, but as he approached his adolescent years, things got worse. I would fight tooth and nail to keep him in the placements he was in, because he is intelligent, you could see it in his testing, but his classwork just wouldn't get done. He started hanging out with the drugs crowd, and no matter what my husband and I tried to do, grounding, taking away privileges, rewarding good grade/behavior, he would not listen to us. This past May he did something. We had gotten him to a point where he could attend class in his EI building in the morning and at the mainstream high school in the afternoon. He was 3 weeks away from graduation. He was on the varsity baseball team, doing better for himself, and generally being nicer to everyone around him. On the way home from a baseball game one day, an assistant coach, a college student my daughter had graduated with who had teased her mercilessly, was telling the team to quiet down on the bus. My son told him to fuck off, so the coach started bashing his siblings, my other children. When they got off the bus, my son gave that coach the pounding of his life. Now, I didn't like the kid, but I would never have condoned that kind of behavior. My son was arrested, put on probation, and was not allowed to finish the final 3 weeks of school he had. 3 weeks. I had worked my ass off to see this kid graduate. To have him walk across that stage, head held high, as a proverbial middle finger to all the people who said he couldn't do it. 3 weeks shy of getting him across that stage, and they said he was not allowed to walk. They gave him his diploma, but I personally don't even think he deserved that. I felt betrayed beyond recognition, and I still can't think of a way to forgive him for it. Over the summer during his probation he didn't get a job, didn't go to anger management, and tore my house apart with his slovenly ways. He stole clothes from my husband, money from the both of us, and would not do a single thing to help keep anything in his life in order. Finally, I kicked him out. I couldn't handle the fact that I had raised this child to be the ungrateful and disgusting adult that he had become. I'm in touch with him, and we let him come to Thanksgiving, but his probation is up soon, and they are going to be hauling him off to jail for not abiding by it, and I'll be waving as they drive away. I love my son, but he is not the son I wanted him to be. But I refuse to have any contact with my cousin. He is an alcoholic, brags about his criminal connections, and has been violent towards his wife and parents. I don't live in the same country as him anymore, so didn't really have much contact for a couple of years before the last time I saw him, but that time, his friend needed some legal and translating help and I agreed to spend my time with them and solve the issue, as it was within the scope of my professional work. In the evening, there was some catching up with the cousin. We had a couple of drinks, and 2 things happened that made me not want to see him ever again. He tried to make me have sex with him, as apparently we don't really count as cousins if we live so far away from each other, and I had sex with other people in my life, so why not with him? Logic ahoy. He tried to convince me to open a fake business under my name, so that he could use it as a cover for criminal activities. Tried to present it as a chance of a lifetime for me. As you won't have to do anything, just sign some papers from time to time, and you get paid for that. You know what's worst? The fact that he treated me as if I were an idiot and couldn't realize what the business was going to be about. After this I kicked him out as soon as the day buses started running and told him to get the fuck out of my life forever. I'm not a parent, but I have a niece. I'm disappointed. Some context, my dad's side of the family has a history of having children too young with terrible people. My dad had my half brother with a batshit insane woman when he was 18 to 19 in his first year at college. He dropped out and made the most of it. Had my half sister a year later. Then shit hit the fan and his then wife turned out to be a nut job. He was her first of 5 to 6 husbands. But thanks to the thankfully reformed custody laws at the time, she got automatic custody. Then my brother had my niece when he was 18ish and my nephew a couple years later. The wife was no better. Sister did the same. The baby daddy is currently in prison. Due to a whole big thing. I didn't know about any of this until I was 18. When I did, I ended up becoming close with my niece. She is 4 to 5 years younger than me, but we got along swimmingly. Much chatting online. She lives halfway across the country. Her senior year of high school, she got knocked up by the stupid fat fuck. I had previously urged her to get birth control. She refused. Said that her dad wouldn't let her. She said that her dad was terrible and ended up calling the cops on him for smoking weed. It became a whole big thing. Turns out that he had actually urged her to get birth control and she refused. He had offered to take care of the kid, but she refused. He wanted and wants her to have the life he didn't. It was a she chow. She moved in with him and went to community college. They have since broken up. He had been cheating on her. Shocker. I think she got knocked up on purpose. I really do. I have no proof of this. But I really do. And I want to be supportive. She was my first family member that I ever really got along with. But I can't forgive her completely. I'm disappointed in her actions and the way she dealt with the aftermath. She is still family, but the closeness is gone.